Fireproof is not heatproof. Something to keep in mind in the future. To compensate for not having a frying pan, I tried to encase my hands in the fireproof chemical I found in my suit and Ifrit sweat, but the stove uses a heat coil to transfer heat into the pans. Flesh doesn't transfer heat very well at all, and when my hands reached a high enough temperature to start chemical reactions, they fell apart from microunits self-destructing. This in turn dumped a bunch of dust and flesh onto the heat coils, which started a small fire. Especially the oils and grease in the tofu patty, those took a while to burn out. The next attempt was to hold the patty over the coils with a knife, but the coils seemed to only transfer heat through solid objects, and placing the patty on the coils directly just started another fire. I gave up and called Mikey after a neighbor came to see if everything was fine. Admittedly, I may have been a bit hasty in trying to cook the burgers without a pan. The tofu patties were kept frozen at the store, and I was worried that they would go bad before I could acquire a pan of my own. The bag says to keep refrigerated until used. I needn't have worried. One of the kitchen devices was a cold storage box called a refrigerator, a fact that a confused Mikey pointed out when I explained what happened and why. I need a good backstory to explain why I'm so ignorant of common human objects and terms. I'll think about it. At least Mikey's attention was somewhat diverted from my ignorance when I told him the address. He insisted on using the elevators to get to me, as my current dwelling was apparently in a rough neighborhood. I met him back at the base, in the elevator corridor, since he would need a keycard to use the apartment elevator. He stepped off his normal elevator with a bag that I presumed held the pan I would need. Hey Tofu. From your description I expected you to be extra crispy. I already regenerated the damage. Oof, I was joking. So you actually fried yourself, musta hurt. Extremely. Mikey stopped moving and blinked at me. Whyy, would you do that then, he asked. Because I wanted to make a tofu burger. Long moments passed in silence as we waited for the elevator, Mikey staring at me the whole time. It started to get a little uncomfortable actually. Fortunately the elevator arrived, and snapped Mikey out of it. Unfortunately, it prompted him to start asking more questions. On one hand, I like Mikey's questions because they tend to point out flaws in my disguise that I need to account for. On the other hand, Mikey is too perceptive sometimes, and he often comes dangerously close to asking questions I never want to have to answer. It's good that I've been getting so much practice at diverting attention from the main topic of conversation. I'd hate to have to kill him. Finishing our elevator ride, during which I let him know that yes I can turn off my pain receptors, and no I'm not a masochist, I led him down the halls to my apartment. We passed other residents and dodged playing children, while I explained to him that pain receptors are an important combat tool, and that turning them off is a bad idea. True enough I guess, but if you aren't fighting anyone, and your hands are already on fire, wouldn't that be a good time to turn them off, pointed out Mikey. Admittedly I couldn't think of a counter-argument to that logic. It just hadn't occurred to me to turn them off. Pain was just another sense before I got human.exe, and afterwards well I guess I was just used to it by then. There were a lot of tests back at the lab. And besides, I wasn't going to let some pain get between me and learning to cook tofu burgers. We arrived at my apartment, and I let us in. I was glad to find that the annoying alarm had finally shut itself off, although the apartment still smelled a bit like smoke. Whoa dude. Crack a window or something. Okay, maybe a lot like smoke. Mikey headed to the kitchen corner as I opened the window again. Then he pulled out a pan from the bag he brought, and surprisingly a lot of other items. A stack of paper plates, plastic sporks like the ones at the school cafeteria, and some napkins. Man, I'm glad I brought plates. You said you moved in recently, but it's pretty bare bones in here. Haven't moved your stuff in yet. I didn't have anything to move. I keep all my stuff with me. Mikey gave me the same type of look that Sandra did when she found out I was homeless. Then he turned back to the supplies and busied himself organizing them. "So did you know some of the other minions have a betting pool about you?" asked Mikey. "What about? On where you're from?" "Ah, oh." I tried to divert the question. "They want to know the sector." "PFT, no dude. They're betting on how you joined the masked life. It's kinda obvious you're used to this kind of thing, no one is this casual about hanging around so many supers and criminals. Like, if you were trying to hide it you weren't doing a very good job." He finished putting the ingredients and supplies in order, then turned to me. "Right now the top bet is that you're a villain's kid." Relief. They were quite a bit off in their guess. "That's a poor bet. Powers aren't hereditary as far as I'm aware." "That's what I said, although Tedic is convinced. Mind giving me the insider info? The pool's pretty high now." Mikey smirked and raised his hand in a stop gesture. "Say no more. Anyways, here, let me show you how to make a burger sans self-immolation." Mikey proceeded to cook 2 tofu patties from start to finish. It seemed rather simple, although I found it somewhat distressing that he didn't follow a recipe. He even added some ingredients that weren't mentioned in any of the recipes I found. He asserted that cooking was an art form, and it takes practice to find your own style. This part one understood completely. It was similar to martial arts, and developing a combat style that suited your abilities. Mikey's burgers were not like Maggie's, however they were still tasty. I cooked the rest of the patties I had bought, some with Mikey's method, some with the recipe, and some with a few modifications I thought might be nice, Mikey hypocritically criticizing my use of extra sugar on these patties. We sat and ate once I was done, and for once Mikey actually put down a decent amount, eating at least a third of what I did. Mikey finished his last burger, burped, and leaned against the kitchen counter. "Man, didn't really realize how hungry I was until the smell hit me." "Well, you didn't eat any lunch after all. You should really eat more." "You sound like my grandma," Mikey chuckled. "I'm serious. You never know when something is going to happen. You wouldn't want to be low on energy when it does. PFT, if I stuffed myself like you do I'd be too bloated to run." Although I will admit that I didn't expect just how much crap happens while on the job. Can't believe it's only Wednesday. That job with the explosion was barely on Sunday, but it feels like it happened last year or something. Maybe your internal timescale is faulty. No, you doof. It's just so much crazy stuff. He sighed and let his head fall back. I'm starting to think this job might be a bit more than I can chew. Take smaller bites. Mikey rolls his eyes. I mean, this job might be more than I can handle. I'm really grateful you helped me get it. Don't get me wrong. But I've been thinking about quitting. Have you been at risk of dying? What? No. But we've had quite a few close calls with the heroes, dude. Turbo was Sunday. Brick today. And you've even had it out with Magenta. You've basically had run-ins with all 3 of E13's heroes in a 4-day span. That's nuts. I've also met 3 of E12's heroes. See, I figured heroes would show up eventually. But this often is just ridiculous. We'll never make it through Odd Summer without being arrested. It didn't seem that bad when they brought me to the station in E12 though. We were only there a few hours and I even got to eat donuts. Dude. That barely even counts. That wasn't a real arrest. And no offense. But you have powers and I don't. I doubt Hellion's lawyers will be quite as prompt when they are just trying to get some grunts released. If I get pinched I'm basically on my own. I'll try to help you. He rolled his eyes. But muttered. Thanks. I considered his concerns. We had indeed been running into supers on a regular basis. But I had thought this was the norm. Especially considering the job description. It matched my experiences after escaping the lab at least. Plus the heroes wouldn't even try to kill you. Only villains. Vigilantes. And monsters tried to do that. Other villains were mostly intimidated by Hellion. Vigilantes were rare. And monsters were a risk no matter what you did. To be fair, getting arrested was probably a much larger concern for Mikey than for myself. I had no social position to defend. And my own abilities would likely facilitate an escape even without outside help. Hellion's henchmen didn't strike me as the type of organization to go back on its word. But if they did indeed withdraw lawyer support, Mikey would be at far more risk than myself. You have a point. It might be smart to quit now. Mikey seemed a bit surprised by my sudden proclamation. You think Soy sorta thought you were rather gung-ho about this? Well, for me this job is perfect. It's proven quite profitable. And the benefits counteract my biggest concerns. But your situation is different. You have to measure the risk versus reward. He grit his teeth. Yeah. That's probably why I'm so torn on this. The pay is good. A few more jobs like the last one and I'll have the entire first year paid for. Not just a single semester. But if I get pinned even once. A possibility for great return. But with a chance of complete disaster. Personally, I would never take such a gamble. But I didn't know many jobs that would give the necessary payout for this college advancement Mikey was set on. Would a job with the heroes be a better fit for you perhaps? Mikey scoffed. Central only takes people with powers, dude. And the non-hero positions are basically fought over tooth and nail. I'd be laughed at for trying. That was indeed a problem. Mikey had little in the way of combat skills. Maybe if he trained with Adder more often he would be able to fight tooth and nail before summer ends. I'd have to make sure he doesn't miss any sessions though. We cleaned up the kitchen supplies, Mikey letting me keep the utensils and pan. And we're getting ready to go to the elevator. When the doorbell rang. Expecting anyone? Asked Mikey. No. But it might be one of the neighbors again. And a threat wouldn't use the doorbell anyway. I checked through the peephole, a clever little device. I was glad they were standard. But it was only Cindy. I opened the door to see what she wanted. Hello, Cindy. I greeted. She blinked as the air from my apartment hit her. And took a few sniffs. Admittedly, it still smelled quite smoky despite the open window. Surprisingly, when she spoke, her voice was not nearly as raspy as I was accustomed to. Tofu. You having fire trouble? No. Just trying to learn cooking. Some of the results got burnt. Emicham. Her piercing gaze drifted between Mikey and I for a bit. Then she said, well, don't burn the place down. And handed me a small red device. Basically a cylinder with some kind of nozzle/handle at the top. Then without another word she abruptly turned and left. I went to go place the device in the kitchen, fire extinguisher if I was reading the label right. When Mikey spoke up. He seemed a bit stunned. Hey Tofu, who was that? That was Cindy. I replied. Using her civilian name as she hadn't been wearing a mask. Oh. Where do you know her from? She a neighbor? Yes. But I know her from work. Oh. So she works for HH. I haven't seen her around. Well, we do wear masks. Heh. True enough. Still. I think I'd remember a hottie like that. Mask or no mask. Mikey continued to act a bit odd. Muttering to himself about quitting or not quitting. We reached the elevator and both got on. Donning our masks before we did so. You're heading to the base too, Tofu? What for? Asked Mikey. I want to ask one of the lieutenants if they have a place for ranged target practice. Like a gun range. Perhaps. But not for a gun. Sandra says minions shouldn't use guns. For several reasons. I pulled out the weapon I had taken from the four-armed Tinker Tot. I was thinking slingshots. As it turned out, there was not a dedicated gun range. But there was a very large room with a lot of durable targets placed at the far end of it. Seems it was mostly used by powered minions for target practice. The walls and targets were pitted and scarred with various blast marks. Mikey had followed me down to the target practice room despite the late hour. Apparently curious what I was going to do with a flimsy slingshot. Truthfully, it wasn't the slingshot itself I cared about so much as the concept of it. Between guns, throwing knives, and a few other weapons I had researched, such as a bow and crossbow. The problem with all of them was that they required a specialized ammo. Guns were the worst offenders of this, requiring metal carved in a specific shape with explosive powder set correctly. My few attempts to create a working bullet launcher had either fizzled or nearly blown my arms off. The micro units unfortunately clung to the powder I produced, and made it rather unstable in comparison to the real thing. Outright buying the bullets was a possibility, but it was expensive. According to Rattleback, a single box of 50 bullets could cost over $1,000. Not because of production cost, but because they were labeled as highly illegal contraband by Central. Bows were a much better bet. But once again the ammo was a problem. Bone spikes of the correct size and weight for arrows were easily produced. But once launched, the micro units quickly self-destructed, rendering the arrows to powder. My best result was up to 20 feet or so, after which the resulting shards and powder were unlikely to result in fatal wounds. Good for suppressing normal humans perhaps. Not so much for mutants or supers. But a slingshot requires no specific ammo. The concept was similar to the bow, but the power was in the elasticity of the band, and not in the shape of the ammo. This meant I would never be at a lack of ammo. If I ran out, I could just take small chunks from my environment, cement, glass, metal, anything, and launch them as is. No major shifting, no paying money, and easily prepared on the fly. Versatile. The only requirement was an elastic band that could handle the forces I planned to use. And luckily this task my micro units could handle easily. I tested the slingshot a few times with some rocks I saved, and had Mikey try it a few times just to make sure I wasn't missing something obvious. Nothing really to it. Just an elastic band and some aiming required. The next step was to begin testing different organic material. I began shifting along one arm, intending to pull out a tendon to start with, when suddenly Mikey protested. "Ack dude. Warn me the next time you do that. Don't want to lose my dinner." "What's wrong?" "That thing you're doing with your arm. That's your power, right? No offense, but it looks pretty disgusting. Like a scene from The Thing." "Is it really that bad?" "Well, yeah, kinda. Hate to say it, but it looks kinda like Mutavis on Fast Forward. We had to watch a video of it once in health ed. Not too surprising. If Mutavis worked as described, it had to be doing cellular reconstruction in a manner similar to my micro units. The results would look quite similar to someone who wasn't aware of the specific mechanics. Still, better to distance myself from the idea of mutation. Humans were very skittish when it came to Mutavis. I can assure you it isn't Mutavis. It's just a result of my power. You don't have to stay if it makes you uncomfortable though. I'm not worried about that. It's just kinda hard to watch on a full stomach. You gonna be doing it a lot?" "Yes. I need to do all the design testing manually. Then I think I'll bow out for now. It's been a long day anyways." "Alright. Will I see you tomorrow, or have you decided to resign?" "Oh. I'll see you tomorrow. Gonna think about it a bit more for now." "Okay. Later, Mikey. And thanks for the pan." "Ha. No problem, man. Laters. The next day, Mikey and I helped distribute the last of the devices Socket had for us. It went even smoother than last time. The only interesting event was when we met with what was apparently a Tinker Tot lieutenant. He was wearing a mask much like Socket's, with lots of extra devices attached, as well as a plethora of other makeshift devices strapped around his person. What I found odd was that I estimated his age at 13 to 15 years old. And despite appearing to be a tinker, he was also a mutant. Throughout the conversation he twisted small devices together. Small bits of wire and metal that he flexed into new shapes before storing in his many pockets. I had thought being a tinker was a power, and therefore inaccessible to mutants. Fred finished up his conversation with the Tinker Tot, basically an apology from both sides for the scuffle from yesterday. And when we were far enough away I broached the subject of a tinker/mutant with him. I thought mutants couldn't be tinkers. What's that, Tofu? The Tinker Tot. He was assembling devices as well as wearing them. But Pebbles said mutants can't get powers. Oh. He looked back the way we had come. Maybe he's just practiced. The Tots do a lot of work with gizmos and junk. Or maybe his Benedictsi reaction carried over after he mutated. Benedictsi reactions can do that. Sure. Wouldn't be the first time Benedictsi made someone smarter. Mutavis wouldn't throw that away. I wasn't so sure. The way the Tinker Tot assembled those gizmos had been like a trance. Like he wasn't aware he was doing it. It reminded me a lot of Socket at his workstation. Hey. Don't take my word for it, man. I'm no expert, said Fred. Weirder stuff than a mutant with powers has happened. It's called Odd Summer for a reason. Good point. Nothing else happened on Thursday. And I spent the rest of the day testing slingshot designs. My hope was to make the launcher compact and versatile. If I could get it right, it should be able to handle multiple ammo types in addition to whatever I picked up. I hadn't completely given up on arrows. And I wonder what the policy on grenades is. Friday morning was a bit different from normal. While I didn't have a job to do, I was still required to attend a small orientation for the upcoming job on Saturday. On my way to the orientation I received a text message from Nicole. An unusual occurrence. While she often responded to my texts, I messaged her about Griblin Tamer often. She had yet to initiate one herself. Although I immediately understood why she did in this instance. Nicole, hey Tofu, by any chance did you hear anything back from the police? Another monster body turned up. Oh. Another bioweapon body. Maybe this one would reveal more valuable information. Tofu, I have to go to an orientation for my job. But I'll come over when it's done. I sent the message and headed for the orientation room. She sent several messages back saying I didn't need to come in person. But I pretended to not be watching for messages and ignored them. I wanted an excuse to get my hands on the bioweapon. At the orientation room I met up with several other powered minions. Ifrit, Gregor, Olsen, Pebbles, and several others who I hadn't met before. Most of whom were combat model mutants. Imp was there too. His red villain mask standing out starkly. And it seemed he would be leading the meeting. Once the last minions to arrive were settled, all minions in powered masks surprisingly. Imp started to outline the upcoming job. This one would be a robbery like the last one. But in this case it would be during the day. At a busy location. And civilians would be a big concern. This bank robbery was apparently meant to be high profile on purpose. And the villain who had hired Hellion's henchmen had a detailed list of requirements that had to be adhered to. Imp passed out packets of paper with specific details. The instructions were excessive. Most of it was details on where to be and when. But it also contained specifics on conduct. and what we needed to accomplish in different phases of the plan. Multiple backup plans were provided based on the situation. And there was a confusing section that detailed what to do if the robot lemmings escaped early. Normally I would have approved of such a detailed plan. But the discovery that each minion had a different set of instructions specific to them seemed utterly impractical. Surely this, Trebla the Terrific, understood such a complicated plan would never survive application. Imp finished up the meeting, leaving the minions scratching their heads in confusion and frustration as they puzzled over their own specific instructions. I quickly memorized my packet before heading over to where the other newbies had gathered. Maybe if I looked at their instructions as well, the plan would make more sense. The reactions to the plans were varied. Gregor seemed as confused as I was. Ifrit seemed focused on memorizing the plans precisely. Olsen was surprisingly laughing as he read through the robot lemming section. And Pebbles just sat in his chair with his head in his hands, grumbling about eccentric villains. I decided to ask Pebbles about Trebla, since he seemed to have encountered him before. Hey Pebbles, would you happen to be able to tell me more about the client? The other newbies turned at my question, also curious about what Pebbles had to say about the villain. Pebbles raised his head and sighed before answering. Well, as you might have guessed, he's the eccentric type. He flicked his already crinkled packet. Everything you need to know is probably in these stupid packets. But if it's advice you want, all I can tell you is to brace yourselves for tedium and chaos. You're about to hench for Trebla the Terrible. Tedium and chaos aren't concepts that go together if I understand them correctly. Tedium implies repetition of an insignificant task. Chaos implies random occurrences. The two don't make sense when put together. But I was inclined to trust Pebbles' opinion since he was an experienced minion. It was probably one of those human concepts that made more sense after you had experienced it. Like bittersweet. Either way, I was now quite a bit more apprehensive of this upcoming job. My analysis of Pebbles' personality and actions had led me to think that he liked chaos and wild, henching jobs. A job that gave him pause was cause for concern. Or maybe he just disliked tedium. He certainly seemed set on destroying the packet of instructions, rolling them up and twisting them like he was. I looked at and memorized the instructions from several of the other minions. It brought more details into focus. But I was still missing large sections of the overall plan. From what I could make out, most of it seemed to revolve around a planned confrontation with E12's heroes, robot lemming handling instructions, and escape procedures. I discussed the upcoming job with a few of the other minions. Gregor had never heard of Trebla before. And Olsen had heard of Trebla, but never worked with him. Ifrit fortunately did know some information about him. Apparently he was a villain who did high-profile jobs almost exclusively, often hiring Hellion's henchmen since he tended to make complicated plans that needed a variety of power sets and talents. Looking up Trebla's info on my phone revealed a lot more was known about him than other villains. At least when it came to his criminal record. Stealing odd items from museums. Attempting to take over an entire sector in a single night. And threatening to take away Wednesdays were all among the random assortment of crimes in his criminal history. I talked a bit more with Gregor, Olsen, and Ifrit about Trebla. Olsen at least seemed enthusiastic about working with a big name. But eventually excused myself. I was eager to see the bioweapon Nicole had found. It took an elevator and a bus to get close enough to Manchaniel St. that I could walk the rest of the distance. In comparison to the other places I frequented, the tunnel that led to her den was somewhat out of my way, being both south of and far from Ashwood St. But I didn't mind. There were several food vendors that were only represented in this area. Like Puzzle's Pretzels. I stopped at the same one I had before and bought a bag of the cheesy buns. Sandra had advised me to be thrifty with vendor food. But in this case I was buying them to bring some to Nicole. When Mikey came over to my apartment, he had brought a lot of other things besides just the pan. Utensils and condiments among them. When I asked him why, he had claimed his grandmama would slap him from beyond the grave if he went to eat at a friend's place and didn't bring anything to share. This was a terrifyingly strong power. How did someone attack while dead? More importantly, how would you attack them back? I had no idea. So the safest bet was to simply comply with his grandmama's rule. I texted ahead to make sure I didn't surprise Nicole like last time. And reached the specific manhole cover a few minutes later. Wait a minute for the coast to be clear before entering. Go down the ladder. Bonk an overeager Nessie on the head, it probably smelled the pretzels. And head around the corner bringing Nicole's den into sight. Hello Nicole. I yelled down the tunnel. And watched as the two boulders that blocked one of the intersection tunnels shifted and moved, revealing themselves to be Nicole's claws, already fully regenerated. She moved until her forward half was sticking a comfortable distance out of the tunnel where she made her home. Hey Tofu. Guess you didn't get my messages. I missed them because I was in an orientation for my job. Here. I brought pretzels. And I offered her the bag. I already ate my share. So you can have the rest. Oh. Thank you. You didn't have to. If I didn't, Mikey's grandmama might attack me. Okay. She nibbled on one of the pretzels, but soon excused herself to put the rest away for later. I was starting to worry that Nicole only ate raw food. She seemed less than enthusiastic about the cooked food I brought with me. Next time I'll bring something more suitable. She said rats were disgusting. But maybe I could find another dark shrieker or maybe sushi anyways. She began. Like I tried to tell you. You didn't need to come all the way down here. Don't you need someone to bring the corpse up for the cops? Well. I was gonna ask my courier. I didn't mean to make trouble for you. It's gotta be a hassle to come all the way down here. Especially since you were busy with your job. And it's odd summer on top of that. It's fine Nicole. No trouble at all. I didn't even see any cars on fire this time. Cars on fire. Yeah. Apparently they light on fire and then start driving themselves around. You didn't hear about it, it's become quite common apparently. I don't really watch the news. The local stuff is usually just who beat up what today. And the news from Central is the paparazzi fluff. If it's actually important, I'll catch the emergency broadcast. I see. Anyways, since you're already here, I guess you can take the body then. It's right here. And she pointed to a wrapped lump which was obviously the dead bioweapon. Seeing as several warped limbs were sticking out of it. I was definitely interested in it. But there was something I wanted to do first. Okay. I'll bring it up when I go. But there was something else I wanted to talk to you about. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I noticed that Gremlin Tamer has a 2-player mode. I finally got past level 5 in Gremlin Tamer. My solution was to simply click on every single interactable object until something happened. Clicking on a sword embedded into a rock finally wound up being the answer. Although I'm unsure how I was supposed to figure it out. It didn't match the other puzzles up until that point. When I asked Nicole, she said it was clearly a King Arthur reference. Which turned out to be a very old fiction story. Basically a test of strength to select a new leader. It made sense in context to that level of the game. But I wouldn't have made the connection without knowing the story. Just one of those human things you had to know to make sense of. I'll get the monsters and you set the levers, said Nicole. Okay. Solving the puzzle had unlocked the multiplayer feature in the game, in which you could get different rewards for playing with others. I had been eager to try it. But Mikey didn't play the game. And Lily refused to play with shrimps. Ack. Manticore trap. I see it. All in all, it was quite interesting. The experience worth more than the promised rewards. The puzzle and maps were modified for two-player gameplay, which meant it served as a cooperation test. I'd never had anything like it back at the lab. Red button or blue button? Blue. Of course. Some of the presented challenges still required good reflexes, which made it all the more impressive that Nicole was able to play on a small flat screen using a pair of claws. True. It was the smaller pair of mandible claws. The ones with digits. But when compared to myself, and my ability to modify my hands to fit the phone screen precisely, it made her skill all the more impressive. How do you tap the phone so quickly without breaking it? How? I put in a scratch-resistant screen. But I also have a lot of practice with delicate electronics. When I'm scavenging for abandoned gizmos and gadgets, sometimes I need to disarm them first. You scavenge for parts like the Tinker Tots. She looked up from the game for the first time in a while, with a look that I can best describe as a grimace, before going back to it. Except I'm actually scavenging. Not stealing like those brats. I take it you don't like them. There's a reason I'm south of Ashwood and they're north of it. Besides, they take all the best gizmos. Or just break them. Nothing good left over in their area. The lot of them need a good spanking. The lousy little. Her voice trailed off into inaudible mutters for a bit, which switched to a frantic yell as our gremlins triggered a new trap. One she avoided with ease despite her surprise. Well, it seems your practice with gizmos paid off. Ha! This is nothing. You should see what I can do with thumbs. Alright. I waited expectantly. I didn't realize she had thumbs, maybe her claws can shift. But if that was the case, then I was interested in how much of an improvement they made. Nicole kept playing for a bit. But when she noticed I had stopped, she asked, "What's up? You were going to show me how well you do with thumbs." Her eyes opened wide. All 8 of them. And she stammered as she tried to respond. I didn't quite expect this reaction. But I recognized what it was about. Luckily, Mikey had shown me the proper response. I raised my hand in a stop gesture. Say no more. I won't pry. Despite her lack of real facial features, her relief was palpable. She muttered a brief thanks before we went back to playing the game. We made it pretty far before I decided it was time to leave. I still had a few things to prepare for tomorrow. Thanks for playing with me, Nicole. Oh. No problem. I haven't been able to try those maps myself. So this was fun. I'll drop by when I have time to play more. Okay. Call ahead first though. Sometimes I'm out in the tunnels. Will do. We bid goodbye and I headed for the manhole exit. Dead bioweapon in tow. This one was much like the last one. But definite improvements had been made to the overall design. Nothing of any real interest yet. But if the creator kept improving, I hoped these would eventually be quite valuable. Although I'd probably have to kill them first if the creator finally got it right. Out of curiosity, I tested my slingshot design on one of the tougher portions of the bioweapon. The results were pleasing. I woke Saturday morning when my mask beeped, reminding me of the meetup time. There was actually plenty of time until Trebla's plan was to be put into motion, at noon. But the high complexity of the plan required Hellion's henchmen to meet up hours in advance. I made sure my disguise was good and headed for the elevator. Surprisingly, there were 2 other powered minions on the elevator. Both mutants with combat enhancements. And the elevator was somewhat crowded for it. I had talked to both before, if briefly. And we exchanged good mornings before chatting about the upcoming job. They were cautiously optimistic. As Trebla was a big-name client. And the bonuses for a job well done would be big. Both of them were full-time minions. And making ends meet was important to them. The composition of powered minions in Hellion's henchmen is diverse. But could be divided into roughly 3 groups. Most of them were mutants. Often with combat modifications that made getting a civilian job difficult. Such as in Gregor's case. Then there were people with powers who, for a variety of reasons, hadn't chosen to become a villain or a hero. Maybe they had a previous record that prevented hero work. Or their power was a glass cannon ability unsuited for direct combat. Or they were training to eventually be a full villain. Or even just they didn't care for the limelight. Finally, the last group were both mutants and supers who, despite not having much actual combat power, had decided to take the risk of being a powered minion in order to get a pay increase. Buzzer was one such example. While he could manipulate sound waves, he was not completely immune to his own power. And couldn't use it for combat without risking his own health. This last group was decidedly small. For obvious reasons. The elevator let us off. And I headed for the cafeteria for breakfast. There were more minions about than there usually were this early in the morning. Most of them drinking coffee while going over their instruction packets. I went to grab some coffee and bagels for myself. Tofu, you bottomless pit. Leave some for the rest of us. Good morning, Buzzer. Not if you drink all the coffee, it won't be. Buzzer grumbled as he made himself a cup of coffee. He appeared quite agitated. Every time he grumbled, I detected a subsonic vibration emanating from him. He did this sometimes when extremely agitated or frustrated. Is something wrong, Buzzer? Maybe I can help. It wouldn't do to have him distracted right before the job. Only that I'm working on a Trebla job. Which means I get to be a coordinator for this snake knot of a plan. He shook the packet of paper in his hand in emphasis. Indeed. His instruction packet was a lot thicker than my own. May I see your instructions? Knock yourself out. He handed me the packet. And I looked it over as we took seats at a table. The reason for the thickness of the packet was readily apparent. As it included a bunch of notes on where to direct people. Or what to listen for and when. I finished reading it and handed it back to Buzzer. See, hurts just to look at, don't it? No. But admittedly it is complex. I still want to know more about phase 24 through 32. And I'm not getting why both Spikes and Hedge need to be present in the lobby for backup plan 3-3B. I need to read either Spikes, Hedges, or Dillo's packet, I think. Buzzer stopped moving. Then he very carefully set his coffee down. And opened his packet to a random page. So if I were to ask you what to do if Hydrox shows up during a 4-3A, in phase 5. The answer would be, I wouldn't be there. But Kellet and Rusty would hopefully have the hydrophobic barrier up at that point. Then they should skip to their phase 11 starting positions. Buzzer closed his packet. Did you memorize the whole thing just now, Tofu? Yes, is that bad? Hell no. Best news I've had all week. Guys. Give your instructions to Tofu. There was a brief flurry of activity as Buzzer explained. And the other powered minions began handing me packets one after the other. I memorized each one before handing it back. Congratulations, kid, said Buzzer. You've just been promoted to co-coordinator. Well, that was good, right? Costume choice is important if you work in the cape scene. Even for minions. Especially for minions. A costume has to serve as both functional equipment and as an identification system to people who see it. Heroes, for instance, wear mostly bright colors. And their masks tend to show at least part of their face. This makes them recognizable to allies, so they don't get hit by friendly fire. Villains, to draw fire away from civilians. And to civilians, so that the civilians don't panic and refuse to follow their instructions. Minion outfits try to do the opposite. While the goal is to draw some attention, to draw fire away from non-powered minions. In a group the outfits blended into each other, making it harder to pick a single minion out of the crowd. A collection of dull blacks, dark grays, and rusty browns, with only the gleaming bone-white masks to really draw attention. But still, even with a generic feel to them, the suits had small differences between them. Modifications to allow for spikes or bony plates. Or just small differences in design to help identify who is who among the minions. My own suit was basically two interlocking pieces. One dull black and one dark gray. That created a distinctive swirling pattern along the limbs. Everywhere the two colors met was actually a hidden seam. And the suit would readily split along said seams to accommodate my shifting limbs. Admittedly the pattern it makes is distinctive. But in a group of powered minions it stands out no more than any of the other minions do. Versatile. Durable. Subtly camouflaged. And most importantly, bulletproof. My favorite feature. I finished putting on my suit, newly repaired. And exited the locker room. Heading for the garage. There I found the minions hurriedly going about their assigned tasks. Lieutenants giving direction and making sure everything went smoothly. Buzzer quickly led me over to where Rattleback was talking with a masked villain I had never seen before. She wore a golden half-face mask, similar to the domino masks. But shinier. And covering more of her face. And a suit much like Sandra's. Although it appeared to be somewhat more stylized. In one hand she held a tablet device. And periodically tapped at it as she talked to Rattleback. I can assure you we will be ready to go well in advance of the stated time MS. Yeah, said Rattleback. As you say, replied Leah. But may I remind you that the goal is to be neither late nor too early. Master Trebla's plans rely on precision. And we will try to be as precise as possible. Said Rattleback. Hey Rattleback. Might have found a way to help with that. Interrupted Buzzer. Both Rattleback and Leah turned to us. Tofu's been holding out on us. Got himself an eidetic memory, memorized all the plans. Mind giving him administrator privileges so he can help me coordinate? Oh, that would be helpful. That wasn't in his file. Said Leah. Cutting Rattleback off. It's too late to make changes to the plan now. Especially with an untested variable. Come on. These instructions might as well be the complete works of Shakespeare. Give me a break. Complained Buzzer. They are complete instructions. Said Leah with a scowl. And I was assured that would not be a problem for an organization of Hellion's henchman's caliber. But if you feel you are not up to the task then I believe there is still time to cancel our request. Rattleback sputtered. Wait. I'm sure we are quite up to the job. How dare. Buzzer. Shut up. MS. Leah. I'm so sorry about. Variation 5. On fallback plan 14-7C. Requires that at least 3 melee combat capable minions. Preferably Hedge. Dillo. And Zaps. Retreat down corridor 21 within a time duration lasting no more than 3 minutes. The three of them stopped arguing. And turned to stare at me. If they successfully traverse the hall in 3 minutes, they should retreat to the getaway vehicle parked in the easternmost alleyway next to the building. Which is the optimal outcome? If they take longer. A hero. Most likely Hydrox or Ferosa. will likely be in range to damage the vehicle. And instead they should head to Corridor 23. Where an escape tunnel was put in place that will allow transit to the tunnel system under Sector E12. None of them moved for a bit. Then Leah began tapping at her tablet. That section of instructions wasn't included in your packet. She finally said. No. It was included in the packets of Hedge. Spikes. Dillo. Gregor. And Zaps. Most likely Maz and Kellet as well. But I haven't read theirs yet. MHM. Would coordinating hinder your ability to complete scenarios 5, 7, and 8? Those require you to be correctly placed. I should be able to carry out any of the scenarios while communicating. As long as I can use the mask network, and admittedly scenario 14 might be difficult for me if too many people require instruction at the same time. Scenario 14 was a tricky one. MHM. She tapped at her tablet some more. All right. I'll have a set of updated instructions for you before the departure time. I'm glad to see that someone can appreciate proper planning. And she glared at Buzzer before turning to Rattleback. Rattleback. I'll send you any relevant updates. But there should be no major changes. Please plan to depart as scheduled. If you'll excuse me. Leah walked away while tapping at her tablet. And the three of us watched her go. Thank you for that, Tofu, said Rattleback. Then he smacked the back of Buzzer's helmet. Preparations continued quickly after that. Despite half the minions sneaking extra peeks at their packets, I myself was already fully prepared. My suit was repaired. Helmet was working fine. My core was secure inside my helmet. And my prototype slingshot was ready to use. I had even taken the time to replenish my lost supply of knives. And carved myself some ammo for the slingshot. Mass at 100% norm. Energy reserves equals 23 cycles continued operation. All biometrics are green. I was fully prepped and ready. But Rattleback still had one more surprise for me. Tofu. Zaps. Spikes. Over here. Finally got those speedster Murrays I told you about. I wandered over. Along with Zaps and Spikes. And Rattleback handed out 2 packets to each of us. The markings on them declared UNA. Government property. Commercial resale is unlawful, and nutritional bar, speedster formula, and may contain peanuts. I started unclasping the mouth cover for my mask. Intending to eat them. Ack. Don't eat it all at once, Tofu. Those are high-grade speedster food. Use them only when you need a pick-me-up. Said Rattleback suddenly. They aren't dangerous, are they? Asked Zaps. Worse. They're expensive. Don't waste them. I ate mine the moment Rattleback was out of eyesight. The taste was okay. But the real prize was how many calories they contained. Energy reserves equals 26 cycles continued operation. They were packed with calories. Days worth of energy. And that was from just one of them. While eating the second, I paid extra attention to the way the molecules were packaged. The bars had probably been produced using some kind of tinker tech. But there wasn't anything supernormal about their materials. And I took notes with the intent to replicate the molecular storage method used. I hadn't been paying much attention to energy storage techniques. Sugar and other human foods made meticulous energy conservation unnecessary. But I wouldn't pass up an efficient energy storage method if it just fell into my lap. I also made a note that Spikes and Zaps needed speedster fuel. Always good to add potential weaknesses to my list of known information. Preparations were completed shortly. And we embarked our assigned vehicles. I found myself with Buzzer, Ifrit, Olsen, and surprisingly Imp. In a somewhat beaten-up looking 4-door sedan. Despite its looks, The car hummed to life perfectly when Buzzer started it. "You kids all strapped in?" asked Imp. Ifrit groaned. And Imp and Buzzer both chuckled. I needed to work harder on understanding humor, I still wasn't quite getting jokes. The convoy of vehicles left in much the same way as the last major job, using the large elevator to reach the surface. And then splitting up as we drew closer to the target location. The bank in question was just over the sector border in E12. Which explained why Trebla's plans focused on countermeasures for E12's and E13's heroes the most, although there were a few mentions for heroes from NE12. SE12. SE13. And a note about a nemesis from S10 who apparently hated Trebla a lot. As we drew close to the bank, Imp announced we had reached his stop and teleported out the window to a nearby rooftop. Buzzer continued on. And eventually parked the car across the street from the bank's front entrance to wait for the job to start. My helmet crackled with announcements that different minions had reached their assigned positions. And I casually observed our surroundings through the tinted windows while we waited. The buildings around us were mostly 4 to 5 stories tall. And there was a distinct lack of the chaotic bridgework common to E13. The bank itself towered over the surrounding structures at 10 stories. And was covered in large glass windows that made the building look like a giant mirror. To be honest, after the labyrinth that was E13, E12 was kind of boring. All the buildings were near-perfect rectangles. And were evenly spaced to allow for thin roads between buildings. The only interesting feature in the architecture around us was the wide staircase in front of the bank. The final group radioed in. And we waited for the start time mostly in silence. Buzzer was grumbling about our starting position. And I asked him about it. "Bah. There's no reason for us to be in front of the bank," he said. "He just wants people to show off his perfect plan to watch. His signal will be on the dot." And he pointed to a small clock display on the dashboard of the car. The moment the display ticked over to 12 a.m., booming voice sounded over the busy street. "Tremble before Trebla." A humanoid figure suddenly fell from the sky, landing on the front steps of the bank with a bang. He was encased in a golden suit of armor. Each movement he made reflecting rays of light in every direction. There was no helmet, which allowed me to see that he wore a trimmed goatee and slicked back hair. But he wore a gold/silver domino mask that matched his armor. And every now and then the area around his head shimmered, suggesting some kind of barrier. The civilians all around had frozen or ducked at his loud entrance. And most were gaping in his direction or hurriedly rushing away. He raised one hand in the direction of a parked car. And a beam of light shot from his palm, smashing into the car and causing something in it to explode. That got the civilians moving. And there was a lot more screaming as the crowd hurried to vacate the area. See complete show-off. Trying to impress the lowly minions, said Buzzer. I considered Buzzer's statement. Hellion's signal was better. All right. I'm starting to understand what Pebbles meant by chaotic tedium. The plan started well enough. Trebla attacked. Hellion's henchmen stormed the building. And civilians screamed a bunch. Some of the people inside the building were then taken as hostages. Which is why Fortress City must cede to my demands. But after that phase of the plan was completed, things got a little stranger. I alone can plan for the unforeseen. Without my grand vision, Fortress City will suffer constant chaos. It was my understanding that robbing a bank meant stealing money from it, not making a speech on the front steps of the building. True. He was also shooting at any cop cars that showed up. But that was more a consequence of the plan rather than a part of it. Fear not. For my rule will be benevolent. And just. Part of my uneasiness with the current state of affairs was that I hadn't known about this speech part of the plan. It had been labeled under Trebla distracts the heroes. But I felt it should have been labeled Trebla attracts the heroes instead. I didn't understand how this helped us rob the bank. I was curious. But my requests to Leah that I be provided with a complete set of the plans, including Trebla's portion, had been denied, citing security risks. Oh well. I'm sure whatever Trebla was aiming for had to be important. Either way, I had a job to perform. Zaps, hey Tofu. I'm not seeing the room I'm looking for. Tofu, you're at the 5th floor intersection. Zaps, ah. 5th floor. Tedious though it may be. Did nobody read their packets? My mask had a constant stream of texts coming in from minions who were out of place. Luckily the masks had a handy little voice-to-text feature to keep the radio uncluttered. I was in the lobby of the bank. A large chamber that took up most of the first 2 floors of the building. A lot of polished stone, metal, and glass went into making this room as impressive as possible. Obviously this banking faction did quite well for itself. I sometimes wonder why architecture seems so varied among human dwellings. Some of it makes sense, such as one building serving a different purpose from another. Or when a faction like the Tinker Tots makes modifications that suit them. But what about things like wallpaper? Or carpets? They had so many different variations of the same thing. How did they ever choose what to use? Mikey had mentioned how bare my apartment was. So I was planning to fill it out more to match a human dwelling. But how should I pick furniture or decorations? I wasn't exactly expecting many visitors. But I'd rather not worry about my den making visitors suspicious. Maybe I could just take some of the furniture from this place. The chairs here seemed rather comfortable. I'd ask if it fit into the plan later. I patrolled around the lobby, making a slow perimeter while I answered questions and directed the minions on other floors. Buzzer and Ifrit had gone with their own groups, so that not everyone directing was in the same spot. There were some hostages in one of the lobby alcoves, guarded by Dillo and Spikes. And Olsen and Gregor were near the front window of the building keeping an eye on things. I made one more pass of the lobby before I wandered over to Olsen and Gregor, to see if anything had changed outside. People are fallible. They make mistakes and I am needed to correct them. Like the drainage on 3rd and Victoria. The contractors screwed it up, yelled Trebla from outside. Sure does like to hear himself talk, said Gregor. Ah, come on. The guy's hilarious. Right, Tofu? Asked Olsen. Ah. Bah. You greenhorns don't know what you're talking about. This is top-shelf villainy right here, replied Olsen. And the trailer for Ghostbusters 9 gave away the entire plot. The whole thing. Although he does seem to be running out of material. Heroes better get here soon. It's been 7 minutes since we started. I supplied. The first hero was supposed to show up at the 5-minute mark. Ha. Never around when you need them, I guess, said Olsen. I've actually been meaning to ask about that, I said. The plan for this robbery doesn't just assume the heroes will show up. It seems to rely on it. I thought the point of a robbery was to get in and out before they show. Ah. But see. You are assuming that money is the goal here. It's not. Well, not the main goal. Let me paint a picture for you. How much money do you think we can steal from here? I wasn't really sure how much money the average human had. I'd never worked a regular job. If I used what I had earned so far as a baseline, and did a few calculations based on the estimated population size of this sector. A few $1 million, I guessed. Nope. Way too high. E12 and the surrounding sectors are crawling with villains and other desperate sorts. Who can walk through walls, shoot lasers, etc. etc. They wouldn't keep a lot of cash at a branch building like this. Try a few hundred thou. Maybe. Ah. I could see the problem. He won't earn a profit from stealing the money. Bingo. I had earned 3,000 from the warehouse robbery job. 5,000 total with the bonus they gave me. Multiplied by 30 of Hellion's powered minions. That was a minimum of 90,000 just to hire us. Plus he had his own minions to pay. And if anyone got arrested or injured there would be legal and medical fees. Olsen continued. Now it's possible he could milk blood from this stone. Ransom the hostages or something. But a guy like Trebla now. He's a showman. I'll bet dollars to donuts this is all part of some other scheme he's got going on. Maybe he's planting evidence against an enemy. Or looking for blackmail material. Maybe he's planning to steal the entire bank company in a hostile takeover in the stock market. Maybe this is just another domino in some plan that will pay off months from now. Or, God damn it, what is taking so long? Get out here and face me. Maybe he just wants to beat up some superheroes on camera. Well, if he wants to fight a hero, I think he's gonna get his wish. Said Gregor. And he pointed outside the bank. Walking down the street. Almost casually. Was a human male in a colorful costume. His pants had a bright red, yellow, and blue pattern. His mask had a matching color scheme. And was full face. With cutouts for his eyes, mouth, and nose. Strangely. The mask seemed to be made of a cloth material rather than something protective. While he wore no shirt. A shiny yellow cape was draped over his shoulders. Target recognized, Suprex. E12 hero leader. Powers described as enhanced endurance, flexibility, and strength. Estimated threat, high. I remembered him from when I got arrested. Although I hadn't yet seen him in action yet. Supposedly he never took off the mask. Which meant he didn't have a civilian identity. He approached Trebla. Coming to a halt 20 or so feet from him before speaking. Say, or Trebla. Your reputation precedes you. Might I ask why you are causing trouble in my home on this lovely day? Your sector has the honor of being a stepping stone in my conquest of Fortress City. Suprex laughed. Then replied. A wonderfully optimistic goal. But. I'm afraid we can't allow that. A second human appeared. This one diving down from the sky behind Trebla. The shifting purple light around her identified her as Magenta. Her fists extended and glowing as her force field concentrated around them. She must have flown over the bank itself to stay outside of Trebla's line of sight. She accelerated towards Trebla. No doubt intending to hit him from behind. Maybe someone managed to send a warning. Or maybe Trebla had other ways of sensing her. Because when she was about 20 feet away he spun and held a palm out towards her. The same energy ray he used on the car shot out. Hitting Magenta full on. Her force field held. But the physical force it applied to her counteracted her forward motion. And sent her careening into the side of a building across the street. Hard. She fell to the ground dazed. Huh. Maybe this part of the plan wasn't so bad. Suprex grimaced. Then unclasped his cape before throwing it to the side, why have it if he wasn't going to use it? Then he charged Trebla. Who spun to meet him. And they began to trade blows. I was about to signal the others to move into the next phase of the plan. When a shout rang out from behind me. I spun to witness Dillo and spikes being thrown through the air and across the lobby. An impressive feat considering both were of the physically imposing variety of mutants. The woman who had thrown them was another I recognized from my time in E12. Easy to do since she appeared to be composed of a highly reflective metallic substance. It sort of looked as if she was a statue made of the same shiny metal that decorated the lobby. No need for a mask and armor on this one. Target recognized, Ferosa. E12 hero. Powers described as enhanced endurance and strength. Metallic body. Estimated threat, high. Behind her a blur went back and forth. A hostage disappearing each time it streaked by. That must be Turbo. Bringing the number of heroes rapidly up to 4. I assessed the situation in comparison to the plan. And sent out a text to Lia describing the situation. She quickly responded with a message to all the minions. Lia, Suprex and Magenta have engaged Trebla. Ferosa and Turbo are confirmed in the lobby. All minions please skip ahead to Phase 5. We'll be going with Scenario 5B. Robo-Lemmings will be released into the lobby in 2 minutes. I was quickly inundated with messages from minions asking where to go. I answered them while I prepared myself to fight Ferosa and Turbo. Turbo was almost finished evacuating the hostages. Which was fine. They had already served their purpose as a distraction. Diverting the hero's first strike. If they were rescuing the hostages, they weren't catching us in a sneak attack. And we didn't really care to harm the hostages anyways. Best to start attacking Ferosa before Turbo was finished though. Dillo and Spikes were relatively unharmed from being tossed about by Ferosa. Although Spikes needed help unpinning herself from the wall she impacted. A somewhat unfortunate side effect of her mutation. Which had an assortment of spines and quills running down her back and forearms. She seemed quite irritated about getting stuck to the wall. And after Dillo pried her off, she pointed her arms at Ferosa and, to my surprise, launched spikes from her arms. Several of the bony spines flew through the air and impacted Ferosa, who reflexively blocked them but needn't have bothered, as they broke on her metallic skin. Spikes cursed, but kept shooting. Her projectiles didn't do much. But Dillo started to throw furniture at Ferosa. And then Gregor and Olsen joined in. I followed their lead and unstrapped the mouthpiece of my mask. Then I shifted my mouth a bit. And spat a metal slug at Ferosa. It impacted her torso, and made an interesting ringing noise. The heck was? Tofu. What the hell is wrong with your face? Asked Olsen to my side. Sly and sought, I tried to answer. I had finally figured out a compact design by using my tongue and the material in bubblegum as the band. Just needed to hook up the flexible muscle to different parts of the jaw. Admittedly, it wasn't very good if I wanted to talk at the same time. And I was somewhat disappointed that it wasn't strong enough to puncture Ferosa. I wonder if Spikes would be willing to share. Her mutation looked really useful, if somewhat limited in ammo. The spines seemed to grow back quite fast. But she was already eating one of her Maries with one hand. Must be calorie intensive. I tried to sidle closer to Spikes as we kept pelting Ferosa with projectiles. Maybe I could see how the spikes worked. Surprisingly, Ferosa hadn't tried to move from her position and stop our barrage. And I realized she was trying to shield the hostages from any stray debris. Heroes really took this protecting civilians thing seriously. Ferosa held up easily under our assault. Enough that I started to wonder if I was just wasting ammo. I was just about to shift my mouth back when it became a moot point. One of the chairs Gregor had thrown suddenly blurred and flew at Olsen instead, knocking him over. Turbo was finished with the hostages. Oh sure, cried Spikes. Right before Ferosa barreled into her. And sent her tumbling into Dillo. Luckily for him, the armor plates that encased his body stopped her spines from hurting him. Unfortunately for me, it meant I was right next to Ferosa. I fired a metal slug at Ferosa point blank. It hit her in the eye and her head snapped sideways with a ringing noise. For a moment. Then her face turned back to me. Her mouth twisted into an almost snarl. What was the correct curse word to use in this situation? Shit, I think. Yeah. Shit. Ferosa's punch caught me where the solar plexus would be on a human. And I went flying. Not as far as I think she expected. Since I was heavier than a normal human. But enough to send me sprawling halfway across the lobby. The fight got a bit rough after that. Olsen was getting absolutely pummeled by Turbo. And Gregor wasn't nearly fast enough to help him. Ferosa was stomping her way across the lobby towards them. Only stopping long enough to kick Dillo and Spikes along the floor with her. We were swiftly being herded in. I was starting to worry we wouldn't be able to stall the heroes long enough. I righted myself. And extended my arms and legs into my preferred combat configuration. Then I extended Whiskers out of my suit. Before spitting more slugs at Ferosa as fast as I could. She raised a hand to guard her face. And then abandoned kicking Dillo and Spikes to charge me. She was surprisingly fast considering how heavy being made of metal should make her. Still. With my legs configured for jumping and running, she wasn't able to catch up to me. And I led her on a chase around the lobby while pelting her with slugs. Even better. Spikes and Dillo managed to recover enough to go and help Olsen and Gregor. And between the four of them they prevented Turbo from targeting any one of them for too long. It seemed Turbo's injury was still bothering him. Now we only had to hold out for 23 more seconds. Which was around the time that Turbo decided to target me instead. He abandoned taking shots at the others. And attacked when my back was turned. He touched one of my whiskers and triggered a reflexive attack. My leg whipping out to try and hit him. And missing. Chechekechek. A terrible grating noise came from one of the rooms at the back of the lobby. And out of the door poured what at first looked like a swarm of armored pack rats. They had generally the same shape as a rat. But I quickly realized that these things had no organic parts at all. They were completely mechanical. And looked to be covered in metal armor that was polished until it shone like Ferosa. Several of them had non-standard modifications that spat sparks. Or had whirling blade attachments. These must be the Robo-Lemmings. I was fascinated. This was the first bioweapon implementation I had seen that was completely non-organic. And I was curious to see what they would do. I was, however, less excited at being tossed into the swarm of mechanical monsters like a fleshy projectile by Ferosa. Admittedly, I panicked at first. But after the other Robo-Lemmings didn't attack me, I pulled myself off the one Robo-Lemming I had crushed. And started putting myself back together while watching the other Robo-Lemmings all rush Ferosa. She was strong enough to destroy them. But they used the same swarm tactics rats did. Disregarding personal safety so that at least some of them would be able to reach her. Where they touched I saw sparks fly. And eventually they overwhelmed her. Dragging her down and carrying her out the front of the building, breaking the floor-to-ceiling window as they did so. Turbo zoomed around the room. But the Robo-Lemmings covered everything. Leaving no safe footing. And he was forced to retreat as well. "Cough, you guys alright?" asked Olsen from his spot on the floor. The other minions sounded off. And I gave a thumbs up since I couldn't talk yet. Gregor was the least injured among us. And despite Dillo and Spikes being kicked around by Ferosa, it turned out Olsen was actually the worst off. He had several fractured ribs and a broken leg. "Mind helping me out, Spikes?" asked Olsen. And Spikes shot him in the chest and neck quickly. He reappeared unharmed. Then said, "Well, that was fun. What's next on the agenda?" The other minions groaned. "Buzzer, respond. I know you can hear me, damn it." My group had retreated to one of the back halls of the lobby that led to a side entrance. It was the main congregation point for gathering the loot before we left. And minions were bringing boxes and bags out the door to waiting vans. Lia stood off to the side, yelling into her mask. And the minions gave her a wide berth. Seems not everything was going according to plan when she saw me. She instantly abandoned trying to contact Buzzer and headed towards me. Tofu. Have you heard anything from Buzzer or the other minions who headed to the top offices? Not since about 3 minutes ago. Damnation. Alright. Follow me. The rest of you to your assigned places. Lia led me to a door that opened into a spacious stairwell. Then she stomped up the stairs, impressive while wearing high heels, while muttering about people that couldn't follow simple instructions. Incompetent, have to do everything myself. Probably broke the vibrosaw. Tofu. You can open a steel safe. Correct your resume said you carved through a reinforced floor. I have a resume, I believe so. But it might take a while if I have to be careful. Well, you'll have about 4 minutes to try. Master Trebla will be done with his fight soon. It's a small safe. Embedded into the wall of the branch manager's office. Cut the whole thing out of the wall if you think that will be quicker. Buzzer's group was supposed to be in and out quickly, but they haven't been responding. Probably managed to damage the vibrosaw or some other such nonsense. Let this be a lesson to you. If you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. We continued up the stairwell. Sometimes passing minions bringing down boxes of files or computer equipment. But then as we passed the 4th floor, a violent crash shook the stairwell. And a wall on the landing ahead of us caved in as a humanoid shape in golden armor flew through it, embedding itself in the opposite wall. Master Trebla. Yelled Lia as she rushed up the stairs, stumbling a bit due to the pieces of rubble that had scattered about. I decided to follow her up when no heroes appeared through the hole in the building. Mr. Peach. Is that you, Lia? Came Trebla's muffled voice. He slowly pulled himself out of the hole and brushed off his armor, which had held up remarkably well considering. Then he spat out a tooth. Perfect timing. Pencil in a meeting with my usual dentist, please. And make a note, Suprex's power is more than just physical enhancements. Managed to punch past a Gentis 3 Malawian Kwacha's reactor force field. Past, mind you. Not through. Should be impossible. Some kind of second-dimensional shortcut or maybe a mental ignorance erasure. How would one counter that and wait? Shouldn't you be overseeing the vans right now? I am so sorry, sir. There was a slight hiccup with the 10th floor office safe. I wouldn't have left my post except the assigned minions have stopped answering. But no worries. Tofu here can open the safe. We'll be right on track. And no delays expected. Tofu. Yes. The lad who faked his death while fighting Magenta. Absolutely brilliant performance, young man. Top marks on acting and dramatic tension. And I was told it was all ad-libbed on your part. Never could get the hang of it myself. Glad to see you've changed your outfit as well. Street thug with bulletproof jacket isn't very thematic. Although I will admit it helped sell the hero assaults impoverished minion angle. Next time, might I suggest. His next words were cut off as a lamppost rocketed through the hole in the building. Lia and I both ducked in alarm. But Trebla stepped forward and managed to catch the missile head-on. His suit whirred as whatever devices it contained strained to halt the force of the projectile. And he threw it to the side a moment later. Excuse me for a second. Seems Suprex is getting impatient. Definitely some physics nonsense happening here. He can't fly and we're on the 5th floor, the angle doesn't make any sense. 2-dimensional shortcut. It has to be. Trebla walked to the hole in the building. Then he looked around as if searching for something before firing 3 blasts of his laser down into the streets. That ought to keep him busy for a moment. Now then, Lia. You said the team that went to the top floor are having difficulties. What did they say the problem was? Well, I'm not exactly sure. They haven't been responding. Not a simple mishap then. If they've gone silent, they ran into trouble. How odd. Most of the heroes in response range are below. Brick patrols too far out to make it in time. And he's not exactly subtle. Hydrox should be putting out that warehouse fire on E12 South and de Vigilantino. Too many heroes about. They wouldn't risk it. Who else is close enough to Trebla suddenly smiled. Fully and broadly. The bloody gap from the missing tooth making him look rather manic. I have it. Oh, this will be just splendid. Liya. Scenario 14b. Send young Tofu here. And Ifrit. There was 2 of them when I read the report. It needs to be matched. And get footage. I don't care how. Tofu. The safe contents are secondary. Instead, attempt to kidnap the branch manager. They might not bite otherwise. But don't kill anyone. Now's not the time for that. Liya. We'll go with a modified 5-7B. Get the minions moving. Don't wait for me. If I get arrested, go with extraction plan 37 or 39. I'll let you decide. Tofu. I'll be able to buy you 15 to 25 minutes. But as I said, ad-lib isn't my specialty. Ifrit should be on the 6th floor. Use escape tunnel 2 when you're done. The vans won't be able to wait. Now go. Go. Everyone to your places. Oh, I do so love a good debut. I'll have to reorganize my schedule for. Trebla continued to talk for a bit. Mostly to himself, I think. Liya and I had already taken off in separate directions to implement his orders. I just wish I understood the purpose here. This was a risky modification to the plan. And a lot of things could potentially go wrong. At least I now had a firm grasp of chaotic tedium. What's scenario 14b? Asked Ifrit. I'm not sure. It wasn't in the packet. And he didn't explain. Scenario 14 is an encounter with an unknown superhero, though. So I think 14b must be similar. At least he mentioned there would be 2 of them. So I guess we will encounter 2 people. Makes sense. It's a very Trebla thing to do. How so? Trebla likes dramatic fights. And he likes them to be fair. But doesn't that reduce our chances of successfully kidnapping the branch manager? I doubt he really cares about that. Trebla doesn't commit crime to earn money. Tofu. He gets money to commit villainy. Illogical. Ifrit and I were running up the stairs to the 10th floor. And we were discussing how to handle the situation. The original plan had called for Buzzer, Pebbles, and Maz to clear out the safe in the branch manager's office. And move any of the bank employees to the 1st floor with the other hostages. A few minutes after Trebla's fight started outside the bank, Buzzer's communications had gone silent. Only a few minions had gone to the top 3 floors. And they hadn't needed as much direction from Buzzer. So the problem had gone unnoticed at first. Normally a minion disappearing without a trace was a big deal. As there were many different, and dangerous, ways that something could go wrong. Such as mutant animals. Or vigilantes. Our plan was to go in as stealthily as possible. With me scouting ahead and Ifrit guarding our rear. I was apprehensive. But we had received a message from Liya that the cameras were set up. And at the very least there wasn't a giant triggered monster waiting for us. Requests to use the cameras ourselves were discouragingly ignored. The stairwell outside of the 10th floor was empty. With no sign of Maz, who should have been on lookout. I shifted my arm and leg joints to a better position. And slowly crawled through the door leading into the office space. Keeping my body in a lower, harder to hit profile. The stairwell opened into the corner intersection of 2 hallways. And I confirmed both were clear before moving down the left one that led to the branch manager's office. Ifrit followed behind me and covered the intersection. while I checked the first 2 doors, small empty offices. Then the hall turned, leading deeper into the building. And I extended a small tendril around the corner. Tofu, contact. At the end of this hall it opens up and there is a desk. There's an organism on the desk, green. Thin body that splits at multiple points. Each split has a flat green blade extended from it. Is this something heroes use, some kind of sentry? Ifrit, it might be a part of someone's power. But I don't recognize that one. How big is it? Any other features? Tofu, about 2 feet tall. Limb blades look like they have a reach of 1.5 feet. And it's sitting in a ceramic bowl. Not moving. Ifrit, wait. Ceramic bowl. She moved up the hallway and quickly looked around the corner. Then she smacked my shoulder. Ifrit, Tofu. Stop fooling around. Tofu, what do you know what it is? Ifrit, seriously? Tofu, I've never seen one before. Ifrit, it's a potted plant. Tofu, is it dangerous? Ifrit, what, no? Of course not. Tofu, are you sure? Ifrit, just go. I moved down the hallway and checked the room. It was a lot like the room where Lily worked. With the one desk and only one chair behind it. Then I briefly poked at the potted plant. It was feeble. And what I had thought were blades weren't even sharp. This was where fruit came from. I had expected more thorns. Fast-acting acids. Something to kill prey with and justify the expense of costly fruit lures. But this one just sort of sat there. Embedded in some soft dirt. Not moving. Did it have no survival instincts whatsoever, or maybe it was just feigning innocuousness? I gave it space. And decided to do more in-depth research on plants later. I may have been too distracted by fruit the last time. And missed a few small details. The room had 2 doors on either side of the desk. I moved to the right one. Before cracking it open slowly and quietly. It opened into a wide-open conference room. With a long, solid, rectangular, of course, table. Around which many padded chairs were placed. There were 2 doors on the right wall. 3 on the longer back wall. And the room extended all the way to the side of the building. Where a floor-to-ceiling window made up the entire left wall of the room. It was in front of this window that 2 figures stood. Looking out into the streets and talking quietly. Tofu, contact. 2 people facing the window. One is wearing what looks like a white biker suit and helmet. With multicolor piping along the suit seams. And is about our height. The other's costume looks like gray police armor. Except the arms and legs have been removed. And no shoes. About 5'10" if I'm measuring right. Both of them have white armbands with the Fortress City emblem on them. Does that mean something? Ifrit, that means they're sidekicks. But I don't recognize them. They must be new. Tofu, how dangerous are they? Ifrit, they shouldn't be. Central wouldn't let them out in the field unless they could control their powers around civilians. They'll have had that drilled into them. Tofu, so they've received training. Ifrit, anywhere from a week to a month. But if they just got clearance for field work, we've got more experience than them. I guarantee it. Tofu, I see. In that case I think I can sneak up on them and stab them. Ifrit, Tofu. You can't just kill them. Tofu, don't worry. Trebla already told me not to. I'll just stab their spines so they can't fight. Ifrit, that's not any better. Look. Let's just try to find the branch manager like Trebla wanted. We take them hostage and the sidekicks won't be able to do anything. Ah. That was a good idea. Engaging 2 unknown power sets wasn't really something I wanted to do anyways. Tofu, alright. I'll try to find the manager. I extended an eye tendril farther into the room to get a better angle. The large table and thick padded chairs blocked most of my vision from my spot near the floor. But as far as I could tell, the sidekicks were the only people in the room. It was likely the manager was in one of the 5 rooms attached to this one. The blueprints for the building had them labeled as offices. I slipped through the door and quickly ducked behind the end of the table, being careful to be as quiet as possible while I did so. The first door was on the right wall, and I slipped an eye tendril under quickly. It was dark, and I didn't see more than a desk and chairs. From my experience, humans rarely stood in unlit rooms. So I tried the next one. But unfortunately it was also dark and empty. Sigh. That meant the only other rooms to check were on the back wall. The table wouldn't give me good cover at that angle. If they looked back, they'd see me. I decided to crawl under the table and get as close as possible to the doors before leaving cover. But as I drew closer, I discovered another objective that had been obscured by all the padded chairs. Tofu, I found the missing minions. Buzzer, Pebbles, and Maz are leaned up against the back wall of the room, between the middle and far left door. They all have their wrists and ankles restrained with handcuffs. But I don't see any injuries. Ifrit, can you free them? Tofu, I'll try. I made my way towards them under the table. When I was close enough, I checked to make sure the sidekicks hadn't noticed me. Then I moved forward to help the other minions escape. Immediately I knew something else was wrong. Tofu, hey Ifrit, I think they've been incapacitated somehow. None of them are moving. Ifrit, even Pebbles? Tofu, yes. Which was worrisome. Pebbles was supposedly resistant to getting knocked unconscious. Maybe they were affected by a power, Ifrit, damn it. Do you think you can carry them out without the sidekicks noticing? Tofu, Pebbles is too bulky. But maybe Buzzer or Maz, it's kinda risky though. Didn't you say we should get the branch manager first? Ifrit, well yeah. But I mean, there's no guarantee we find them. And Maz has kids waiting at home. Tofu, how is that relevant? Ifrit, look, just get Maz. If they notice, I'll throw a fireball at them. Trebla wants us to fight them anyways. Tofu, but dash. Ifrit, just grab her. Tofu, alright. Alright. I didn't really agree with this change of plans. But she had a point in that we weren't guaranteed to find a hostage we could use. It was indeed possible that they had already been evacuated after all. I started to shift a few limbs around, when suddenly I heard a voice in the room. I was startled for a second. But it was just the sidekicks talking to each other again. What happens if Trebla wins? Do we go down there? Asked the one with the cut-off arm and leg coverings. It was male. And sounded young. He won't. What's wrong, Morph? You scared? Replied the other. A female. Also young. Both of them might have been around Ifrit's or Mikey's age. Kinda. He's been fighting multiple heroes without breaking a sweat. Don't know about you. But I only finished training like a week ago. He's a complete clown. They won't lose. If you say so, Poena. So they were definitely new then. Hopefully that would work in our favor. I made sure the sidekicks were still watching the fight outside. Then slunk over to Maz. I moved very slowly to avoid making a sound. And very carefully slipped an arm under her so I could transfer her to my back. A few tendrils to secure her. And I was on my way back under the table. It was a good thing that Maz was on the smaller side of the human spectrum. And that her mutation hadn't caused her to develop any bony protrusions. Or other features that might snag or clunk against the table and chairs. In fact, The only way you could tell she was a mutant while in costume was the brown scales that covered her hands. Maybe she was related to the twin mutant kids from back in my apartment building. The scales matched at least. I reached the door without complications. And shuttled Maz through to the other side. Ifrit took her. And proceeded to try and wake her. Maz groaned softly. Which was encouraging. But didn't wake up. I removed the cuffs on her legs so she could walk if she woke. But left the handcuffs easier to carry if she didn't. Sneaking a peek through the cracked door revealed the sidekicks hadn't moved from their spot at the window. So I slipped back out and under the table. Tofu, that was easier than I anticipated. It might be possible to get the other two within the time constraints. Ifrit, do it. I moved back to Buzzer and Pebbles. Pebbles would have to be last. He wasn't exactly bulky. But he was solid. I'd need to. Click. The leftmost door on the back wall. The one closest to the window and sidekicks. Swung inward. And a woman in a business suit stepped out. The branch manager. Excuse me. But has there been any update on? The sidekicks looked over to her. The manager looked over to me. And I made a snap decision. Muscles in my legs tensed. And I leapt. Extending my arms towards the manager as I did so. If I could take her hostage. Bam. I was shoved into the wall. By the extended arms of Morph. Both his arms and legs had stretched in order to reach me in time. In the next moment his left arm wrapped around both of mine like a tentacle. And his right hand grew in size before making a fist and smashing into my torso. The manager screamed and retreated back into the office. Slamming the door behind her. Morph was a shapeshifter. I kicked at his leg with my own. Instantly his leg hardened into what looked like rock. And it felt like I kicked a wall. Okay. So he could change size, shape, and composition of his limbs near instantaneously. Jealousy. I grabbed his hardened leg with my foot. Sinking traction claws into the stone-like material. Then I kicked my other foot into his torso. And latched onto his body armor. Suddenly he was supporting my weight entirely by himself. And I pulled him off his feet. Skill and technique were quickly discarded as we rolled on the floor in a chaotic jumble of limbs. Both of us trying to overpower the other with sheer brute force. I began cycling blood. And flooded my muscles with micro-units that set about bolstering and reinforcing. Slowly but surely I began to pull ahead. Poena. Stab him. Morph suddenly yelled. Poena activated her power. 2 red spikes. About 1.5 feet long. Formed in her hands. And she gripped them like knives. They glowed. Like the late Frankie's vaporizing blades. Tofu, Ifrit. I believe I require backup. She didn't respond. But she didn't need to. A gout of flame materialized in front of Poena. Separating her from where I wrestled with Morph. Ifrit had her hand in front of her. And was using it like a flamethrower. Tofu, Ifrit. You need to work on your aim. It's not like Poena would die from a little fire. Ifrit, I'm handling it. Just win already. Easy to say. Not so much to do. Morph had transformed his arms and legs into a semi-metallic substance. And they were a lot harder to push back now. Strangely. The transformation didn't encompass his head or torso. So I spat a knife at Morph's face. I was out of slugs. And the knife embedded itself in his helmet. Oops. I hadn't expected it to go so deep. I needed to readjust from shooting at Ferosa. Luckily it seemed the helmet was pretty sturdy. Poena. Poena. Yelled Morph. I'm trying. Shut up. Poena suddenly flung her spikes at Ifrit. Making her duck. And then she charged Morph and I. This time an orange pole materialized in her hands. And she swung it at my back. It struck a hard blow. But I was immensely relieved when the pole didn't vaporize through me. It hurt though. It hurt a lot. She rained more blows down on me. And each seemed to magnify the pain. No damage detected. I was confused for a moment. I felt the pain. But there was no injury. I tried turning off my pain receptors. But the next few strikes still hurt. It was like the pain was being transmitted right to my brain. How odd. But if it wasn't a real injury, there was nothing to worry about. I was just about to ignore her when her power changed again. The orange pole disintegrated. And reformed into a yellow blade that she held in both hands. I did not want to see what that would do. But Morph had changed tactics from trying to overpower me to just restraining me. Poena lifted the blade up. Bang! And was blown sideways into the wall as one of Ifrit's fireballs detonated near her. Morph and I were buffeted by the explosion. But Morph was most distracted by it. Reflexively shielding his head with his arms. I took my chance. And disengaged from Morph to lunge at Poena. She was still stunned from the blast. And I was able to grab her arms before she could materialize a new weapon. I made sure to hold her hands well away from the rest of me. Get off! Get off me, you freak! A knife at her throat got her to settle down. And Morph didn't seem to have any other tricks. He was on the floor while Ifrit kept her arm trained on him. I transferred Peena's wrists to one hand. And reached for the doorknob to the room where the manager was hiding. It was of course locked. We want the contents of the safe. I yelled through the door. Give it to us and no one gets hurt. No response. I drew back my fist. Intending to smash the door open. And a green pole materialized with two sharpened ends. One end stabbing into the hand I held Poena with. And the other end extending all the way to Ifrit. Stabbing her through the chest. Ifrit screamed. Her raspy voice unable to hit the octaves of a normal human. But somehow all the worse for it. Her body spasmed as she lost voluntary control. And the arm she had aimed at Morph twitched. Launching a fireball. It luckily didn't hit Morph. But it landed just beyond him and exploded in a violent, uncontrolled explosion. I hadn't known she could make them that strong. Morph tried to shield himself by shifting his limbs. But the blast was right next to him. And it sent him flying back in our direction. Literally launching him over us. And towards the floor-to-ceiling window. He hit the glass wall. And it easily shattered. Could he survive a fall from this height? Doubtful. Even with his power. Which was why I had latched onto him with one arm as he flew past. He was heavy. And I nearly lost my grip. But with traction claws sunk into the carpet. And my free hand grabbing onto the concrete lip of the window. I was able to arrest his movement. Sure, he swung down into the side of the building with a crunch. But at least it wasn't 10 stories to the pavement. And besides, he was wearing a helmet. No lethal injuries here. I took a few moments to adjust to the precarious position. Then got my limbs in order and pulled him up. It seemed he had been knocked unconscious by the blast. And his nose and one ear were bleeding. But I didn't see any life-threatening injuries. I placed him down and checked to make sure his heartbeat was stable. Before turning to look for IFR. Thok. Pain. The tip of a bladed pole extended from my torso. This one had vicious-looking barbs along the length of the blade. And it was a deep violet color. Almost black. It hurt. Even with no physical injury it hurt. I tried to ignore it. It hurt. I tried to shut off the pain receptors. It hurt. I tried to destroy the pain receptors. It hurt. Had I thought I knew pain, I was naive. This wasn't a stimulated nerve. It was in my head. In my mind. Inescapable. It hurt. It hurt. It hurt that 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 it hurt. Human.exe has crashed. Recovery time, indeterminate. Calculating. Switching to priority targeting. Everything was still for a moment. Primary objective, eliminate hostile combatants. Exception, non-lethal removal. The shape-shifting. Hellion's henchman minion moved suddenly. An arm striking out like a snake and grabbing a startled Poena around her neck. She had thought the minion was unconscious on his feet. It almost always happened that way when she used this aspect of her power. But apparently he was unaffected. She tried to move the spear. Tried to pull it and forced the barbed blade back through him. But he simply lifted her up and slammed her into the floor, knocking the wind from her. From there she blacked out quickly. Her lungs empty. With no fresh supply of oxygen coming. Only when her power deactivated did the minion finally drop her. All hostiles disabled, proceeding to next objective. It moved to the office door and kicked. Crunch. The door was destroyed. Ripped off its hinges. And the minion moved into the office and scanned the area. Then it moved to the only desk and appended it. Revealing 3 humans hiding underneath. They screamed. Or stared at the minion with wide eyes and mouths gaping. It crouched down to meet the one identified as the branch manager eye to eye. The safe. I was already in the escape tunnel when I finally got human.exe running again. Ifrit was slung over my shoulder. And I was supporting Maz as she walked unsteadily. I had met up with her after leaving the conference room. She had regained consciousness while I retrieved the contents of the safe. And the branch manager. Then she had had to convince me to not drag along the branch manager as a hostage. Now that I could think properly again. It was obvious that Trebla didn't really care about kidnapping her. But in my diminished state, I had simply been focused on following Trebla's plan. And retrieving important objectives such as Hellion's offspring. I didn't want to be barbecue. We walked down the dim tunnel. It had been attached to the bottom of an elevator shaft by Trebla's minions days in advance. I had never been to E12's tunnel system before. But the minions had clearly marked the directions. And even sealed most of the side tunnels. So I wasn't expecting any monsters or rats. Though. It was still a surprise when we rounded a corner and Trebla was waiting for us. His armor was severely damaged. And he had a black eye in addition to other scrapes and bruises. Ah! There you are, lad. Was beginning to wonder if you would make it. How did it go? Didn't get roughed up too badly, I hope. We were roughed up quite a bit. But we obtained our objectives. Wonderful. Splendid work. I can hardly wait to get back and see the footage. Reception is terrible down here. I'm thinking of calling it. Here are the safe contents. I interrupted. And handed him the folders of documents. Oh, of course. Thank you. He took the folders and ruffled through the documents in silence as we walked along. Every now and then murmuring to himself. Was it what you were looking for? I asked. What's that? The documents. Oh. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. Today's outing was more about assessing the strength of the E12 hero team. They've had several deaths and replacements recently. The Espada really were an unpleasant lot. Not an ounce of decorum among them. If that was the main objective, why rob the bank or hire so many minions? Wouldn't attacking them directly be more efficient? Tut tut, Tofu. That just wouldn't do. For proper villainy one needs style. Flair. Chutzpah. Why? Ha! Why, he says. Because otherwise I'm just a criminal. A common lawbreaker. A thug in a mask. And that's bad. No. But that is not what I aspire to, Tofu. Choosing the path of ill repute to survive is one thing. But I don't want to just survive. I want to thrive. I want to climb ever higher. I want to live. It's important to know the difference. Illogical, surviving equals living. I don't understand. Oh, give it time. You're young. Stick with this business long enough. And I guarantee you'll understand eventually. In fact, I believe you're well on your way. Why else would you have stolen that potted plant? Ha! I glanced at the plant nestled in the crook of my arm. It had been on my list of objectives. And while it wasn't very important, grabbing it as I left hadn't presented any real risk to my survival. Just another calculation as I operated without human.exe. Entirely logical. Despite what Trebla might think. Not to interrupt, said Maz. But shouldn't we have caught up to Buzzer and Pebbles by now? Trebla looked at her in confusion. I finished my fight rather early. I doubt they got here ahead of me. Tofu. Did you see where they went? Oops. Hellion was in her office, going over a stack of papers that had to be approved and signed. With her right hand she pulled a paper off the stack. Read it. Signed it. And then placed it into a second stack of completed papers. With her left hand, she tapped. Tap. 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 Her fingers tapped out the steady beat on the wooden desk. Where her fingers hit the desk were many blackened marks in the wood, caused by her power when she lapsed in control. Whatever had possessed her to get a wooden desk this time around, she'd wind up having to replace it before the biannual base move for sure. Tap. 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 The fingers of her right hand began to smoke. And she dropped the pen before she could inadvertently set the important business papers on fire. Smoke, the man, collected the papers and set them safely aside for her. They both knew she wouldn't get anything else done for now. Normally her control was pretty good. Almost 2 decades of practice would do that. But today her nerves were on edge. And it was her own fault. Why did I ever agree to stay out of things, she asked the room. Smoke. Of course. Did not answer. It was a rhetorical question anyways. Hellion's eyes drifted over to a small metal locket hanging from a stand on her desk. There weren't any pictures inside it, far too risky to leave those lying around. But there was an engraving that read, "To my favorite mom. From your favorite little Cinder." They grew up so damn fast. First they were running around the house getting scorch marks on everything. Then they were suddenly perpetrating their first bank heist. And worrying their parents, of course. Such was the cost of being a supervillain with a family. Hellion supposed. She was proud as could be that her daughter had taken an interest in her career path. But sometimes she wished Cindy had decided on something just a bit safer. Like bomb diffuser. Or monster wrangler. Hellion had at first tried to watch over her daughter to make sure she was safe. But had wound up being somewhat of a helicopter parent. And it had resulted in one of the very rare fights with her daughter. The wall they damaged still needed to be repaired, come to think of it. Since then, she had left Cindy's training in the hands of her minions. Albeit her most trusted and competent. Now that Cindy was 18, she was stepping into the real jobs. And she had made it absolutely clear that if she hadn't tolerated her mother's oversight before, she definitely wouldn't tolerate it now that she would be working with her fellow minions and peers. Hellion wanted to respect her daughter's wishes. But damned if it wasn't hard some days. Hellion grabbed a small remote on her desk and turned on the television attached to the wall. Maybe she could distract herself with the news. No such luck. The main story on right now was of course the Trebla heist. A reporter was standing in front of the robbed bank, giving an account of what had happened, heavily edited to favor the heroes of course. Hellion already knew most of the major details. Trebla's minion Leah was always quite prompt with reports. Now she just had to wait for Imp and the minions to get back. She hated this part. That anxious little spark in your stomach as you waited to see who came back. Who had been pinched or who had died. It was for that exact reason that Hellion had preferred to be as hands-on as possible in her early days. But now she had a company to run. And as much as it chafed, she had long ago learned that trying to run a successful supervillainous organization from both the top and bottom was more trouble than it was worth. Damn it, was there really nothing on? Hellion rapidly switched from channel to channel. They were 2 weeks into odd summer. And E13 was entirely too quiet. There was the weird flaming cars. But those weren't even much of a nuisance, they didn't crash or hit anyone. Practically better drivers than real people. The Espada hadn't caused any more trouble either. What were the odds that wasn't an ominous sign? Hell. Even the pack rat swarms were being relatively docile. Hellion usually had to send a team or two in to help clear out the sewers. But it hadn't been necessary so far. She hated the calm. If things were calm, it usually just meant that trouble was brewing under the surface. And would come back to bite her later. The elevator dinged, signifying someone was on their way down. Finally! Exclaimed Hellion, turning off the news and dropping the remote on her desk with a clatter. The elevator dinged again. And opened to reveal Imp. "Hey there, boss. Hope you're in the mood for some good news," said Imp, stepping off the elevator. He grabbed a seat at her desk. "Always. I take it things went well. Like you wouldn't believe. Boss. Jasper's info was right. 100%. Hellion felt her breath catch. Jasper had come back from his trip to Central with more than just the info she requested. He had come back with tall tales about one of Central's most closely guarded secrets. She hadn't dared to hope. But if Jasper was right, it was a prize too tempting to resist. "You're kidding." "Nope. Seems Jasper really hit the jackpot this time. Leah sent me what I needed from the bank. And I planted everything where Trebla directed. A few more tweaks and we'll be ready to roll when the time comes. And no one saw you, no one suspects. Do you think anyone will figure us out? As far as I know, I was in and out clean. Trebla had all eyes on him. It's possible someone might find what I planted. But I doubt they'll know what it means. Besides, no one looks for what they've gained after a bank heist. Well, knock on wood." But she was grinning. And while she discussed details and hammered out preliminary plans, her excitement grew. That spark of exhilaration that let her know she was alive. Sure. A thriving business and blooming daughter did that as well. Of course they did. But sometimes you just had to engage in a little supervillainy. Deleting memory #4F7563687468617468757274 data.sense. Restarting human.exe. Yup. That felt better. Poena's power is truly unpleasant. It somehow caused pain to the human psyche directly. Bypassing the physical medium entirely. As long as she fulfilled the requirement of hitting her opponent, I had to look up the word psyche. Humans have a word for everything. The result was that it caused damage to the mind while leaving the physical body intact. Still, an injury was an injury. A search on the internet for "pain damages human mind" pulled up all sorts of results. The most notable of which was something called post-traumatic stress disorder. I had no idea how one healed that. So I decided to play it safe. and just deleted the sensory data from the memory. As for countering Poena's power in the future, difficult. The early stages of her power hadn't bothered me over much. But the last one had crashed human.exe. Ifrit had been knocked out by the green javelin, Poena materialized. And Buzzer, Maz, and even Pebbles had all been knocked out by her power as well, according to Maz. That meant Poena's power had a very high success rate. So I would need to be aware that she could theoretically remove targets from a critical scenario at will. And for an extended period of time. Even now, Ifrit and Maz slumped against the walls of the elevator we were riding in for support. Not completely recovered. Normally I would just remove Poena. But both Ifrit and Trebla had warned me against killing or even permanently damaging the sidekicks. Maybe it was because they were young humans of all factions seemed to get overly defensive of offspring. Or maybe it was just the sidekick status. I'd need to ask Sandra what the unwritten rules were concerning them. I didn't like having someone around who could disable human.exe. But it looked like I would just need to work around Poena for now. Unless she had an accident in the near future. The sidekicks definitely weren't as experienced as the heroes. Mistakes happened. Our fight with the sidekicks was proof of that. One more inexperienced mistake at a critical moment. And our fight could have easily turned deadly. It was practically more dangerous than a fight with a hero. I hadn't appreciated the effort heroes put into not critically injuring people during a fight. Things like shoving instead of outright hitting. Or aiming for armored or muscled areas when they could have easily smashed a temple or other critical weak point. Removing Poena would have to be carefully done. I didn't want to escalate confrontations with the heroes any farther. And maybe I should stop aiming at their eyes so often. They didn't seem to like that. As for the other sidekick Morph, not a major threat like Poena potentially was. Despite his instantaneous shifting. That worked with no regard for chemistry or physics. His combat designs had been sloppy and amateurish as well. So he obviously hadn't done very well in whatever training he'd completed. If I had his shifter power I could use it 72. No. 89% more efficiently than he could. Shifting his skin into stone. And metal. What? He couldn't use chitin like any sensible organism, probably just showing off. I doubted he even knew how to align his nucleotides for rapid mitosis. A medium-level threat. At best. Maybe he should have an accident too. Cough, by the way. Thanks for grabbing me back there, you two, said Maz. Breaking the silence in the elevator. Oh. No worries, Maz. No problem at all. Replied Ifrit. Yes, it was. It was tactically unsound, Ifrit. You're stepping on my foot. Maz laughed. Well, thank you anyways, Tofu. I have little ones at home. And I hate leaving them with my nan. Yes. That was why Ifrit wanted to retrieve you, Ifrit, my foot. Ah. Did she now thank you, sweetheart? I owe you both one. Oh right. She owes me lunch now. It's fine, Maz. Just part of the job. Said Ifrit. How are the twins doing lately anyways? Ah. It's part of the job, oh well. Ifrit and Maz talked about the twins for a bit. Maz was indeed the mother of the two twin mutants I met at the apartment. I found this curious. As all three of them had the same mutation of brown scales. Searching on my phone for, can humans have the same mutation and offspring have similar mutations, brought up a lot of conflicting results. Some claimed that once Mutavis affected someone it was easier for the virus to transfer to family members. Citing the Donner family case. Others said that similar mutations came about only from similar injuries. And that similarities were superficial. But there was evidence both for and against that theory. Frustrating. Humans had good records of other subjects. But the moment it came to Mutavis information became muddled. I decided to just ask Maz. Maz. I have a question. What's up? I wanted to ask how you and your kids have the same mutation. Did you all have a similar injury? Tofu. Said Ifrit. While stepping on my foot again. Oops. I guess this was another rude topic. I really didn't understand why humans were so testy about mutations. Pebbles wasn't at least. Oh. Sorry Maz. It's fine. It's fine. I'm not offended by questions as long as you're polite. As for your answer, I was already mutated when I became pregnant with the twins. They inherited it from me. Ah. I didn't know Mutavis could do that. I didn't either. Only found out after they were born. Imagine my surprise. We talked a bit more. Mostly Maz about her kids. And I learned a bit more about family dynamics. It was interesting stuff. Apparently the twins could be right little terrors. And they made her want to kill them sometimes. But she hadn't yet. Seems being a parent required good self-restraint. Our conversation was cut short when the elevator finally reached its destination. It had been a longer than normal trip since this elevator started all the way over at the E12/E13 border. The doors dinged and opened. Baby. Suddenly a human woman in red armor dashed in and grabbed Ifrit, crushing her in a hug. I almost attacked before I recognized her as Hellion. Oh my god, I was so worried. Are you hurt? Are you okay? Ilya sent the video over. And I saw you get stabbed. And I lit my desk on fire. But Trebla said you were fine. And. Oh my god. MOM. Let me go. I'm fine. Huh. I'd never been this close to my boss before. Small sparks and tongues of flame were coming off her suit in her agitation. And Maz and I edged around the two of them to leave the elevator. Imp and a few others were in the hall. And we joined the forming crowd of curious onlookers. Oh my god, please stop embarrassing me, said Ifrit, as she tried to extricate herself from Hellion. The sidekick's name was Poena. I supplied helpfully. Her name will be Charcoal when I'm done with her, declared Hellion. MOM. I decided to slink away while everyone was distracted with Hellion's display. It was an interesting example of family interaction. But it seemed rather troublesome. And even a little dangerous with how the sparks and embers were coming off of Hellion barbecues. These families seemed rather beneficial if it meant someone like Hellion would retaliate for you. But at the same time somewhat scary. I'm glad I wasn't part of one. Now. I just had to leave before anyone questioned my performance on this job. I didn't want to have to explain why I left Pebbles and Buzzer behind to Hellion. Or worse. To Sandra. And just where do you think you're going? Oh. Hi Adder. I hadn't noticed her among the minions. She walked up to me and poked me in the chest. What the heck was that? What was what? Ilya sent us the early footage of the sidekicks to look over. Couldn't help but notice the terrible lack of my training you applied to fighting Morph. But he had a power. And Ifrit said I couldn't just stab him. So and that chokehold was pathetic. Poena got up in less than a minute. Well, I was sort of malfunctioning at the time. Follow me. Obviously I need to teach you a proper sleeper hold. But I was going to do tests with the plant. Excuses. But. March. Heroes. The conference room for the E13 hero department wasn't exactly nice as conference rooms went. But it was practical. The chairs were reinforced. The large table was holding up nicely, despite the many dents in its metallic surface. And a large flat-screen TV hung on the wall. Normally the TV might be displaying the news. But currently it was displaying a video of the fight against Trebla outside the bank. Unlike the usual shaky cell phone or news cam footage Brick was used to watching after a fight, this video was cut together using crisp, high-resolution footage, and edited together by someone with obvious talent for choreographing dramatic action sequences. The result was a 35-minute long montage of the villain Trebla holding off 4 heroes and then dramatically escaping, which the villain had then posted to his goddamn blog. Brick sighed and turned towards the 6 other people in the room. Magenta, Turbo, the team's liaison Jerry, a man and a woman who were the case handlers for the sidekicks, he should learn their names he supposed, and one public relations official, whose name Brick definitely didn't care about. He had asked for supers and somehow gotten paper pushers instead. Jerry. Exactly who is this guy again? Well, as you saw in the opening credits, he goes by Trebla the Terrific. He's a high-profile villain who operates mostly in the southern sectors, but he tends to pop up in other sectors randomly. Central Intelligence hasn't determined any overall goal beyond thrill-seeking. I see. Can I assume this was a one-off then? Maybe. Trebla's general area of operation has been moving steadily east, likely due to the presence of Hellion's henchmen. He's become a frequent client of theirs apparently. Wonderful. So what's the damage? Well, the bank was basically cleaned out. They haven't determined a total, but it looks like something to the tune of a little under $1 million stolen, plus whatever it takes to replace the other miscellaneous items like computers. The real concern is the account files. The bank is working to lock down everything affected before Trebla can use it. But the investigation is... Jerry. Skip the rest please. What was the casualty report? Oh. Some good news there actually, 0 casualties. And there were only a few minor injuries. Mainly just people who weren't careful in the rush to leave. I'd hardly call what happened to Morph and Poena minor injuries, said one of the handlers. Micah. Marie. Mackenzie Brick just couldn't remember her name. Morph has a concussion, 2nd-degree burns, and several lacerations on his arms and legs from where the injuries carried through his power. Poena has a bruised trachea, shattered collarbone, and 4 broken ribs, all of which could have been prevented if their senior supervisors had stayed with them. The hostages took priority, replied Magenta. And I'm sure a fist fight with Trebla was the best way to go about it. Excuse me. She has a point, said the PR official. You've not exactly done much to convince the parole board you aren't more than a thug on a leash. Not that I blame you. You're fitting right in. Frankly, this team is one more shady member from being a gang anyways. You. A powered monkey could do a better job. God knows it would make mine easier. You wanna try it? I can drop you off in front of Hellions in 5 minutes. See how damn well you do, monkey suit. Turbo, calm it down. And you're out of line, said Brick, pointing at the relations official in lieu of a name. He waited a few moments to make sure the arguing wouldn't start up again. Concerning the sidekicks, they're alive. And that's what's important, continued Brick, addressing the handlers. We'll send a request to Central to send a medical super if they can spare one. Morph and Poena can decide from there if they want to continue as capes. I realize this was rather rough as first outings go, but better they come to terms with what they're facing now rather than later. I'll have a talk with them about it. As for my team, I agree with their plan of engagement. When a villain like Trebla shows up and takes as many hostages as he did, it's an all-hands-on-deck kind of situation. Prioritizing the hostages was the right choice. And leaving the sidekick with the civilians while the hero deals with the villain is standard procedure while mentoring. Still, that whole building was teeming with hostile supers. Wouldn't it have been prudent for at least one of you to have stayed with them? Asked the other handler. The name Colin kept coming to Brick's mind. But he knew that was wrong. Actually, Hellion's powered minions are composed primarily of mutants. Offered Jerry. They have super status only because they work as a group. And I sincerely doubt Hellion's organization actually has more than a handful of real supers among their ranks. With Morph and Peena's powers there was no reason to think they couldn't handle it. Still. Man. Do you want to baby them forever? Complained Turbo. They collared a couple punks and took their licks. Move on already. As I said. I'll talk to them when they are feeling up to it. Brick interjected. Before Turbo's callous tone could spark another argument. But frankly, if Morph and Peena's injuries are the worst of it, then I'd like to move on. We have higher priorities that need to be addressed. Starting with. I'm sorry. But I beg to differ. Interrupted the PR official. Brick suppressed a sigh. While you might not be concerned with recent events, everyone else is. And it's becoming a PR nightmare. As funny as it might be to watch 4 professional heroes get tossed around by a circus act, I can assure you no one is laughing. Brick gestured for Jerry to pass him one of the folders in a stack on the table. The red one. What is worse is that this business with Trebla only punctuates a growing trend. One that has been building ever since Candor died and you assumed leadership of the E13 team. Brick's temple twitched at the mention of Candor. But he opened the folder. And thumbed through to the section he wanted. Luckily this Trebla business happened in E12. And the liability falls mainly on their shoulders this time. But I have the bank's lawyers breathing down my neck. And I'm having. Brick pulled a photo from the red folder. And flicked it across the table so that it landed in front of the official. Trouble arguing that you all aren't somehow culpab dash. Culpa what is? The photo was of a young woman. Or more precisely. What had been a young woman? Multiple red lines crisscrossed her body where metal wires had sliced into her skin. And ultimately killed her. Held taut by the wires her corpse stood, or more exactly hung, in an alleyway. In a macabre parody of a person gesturing for help. Brick flicked another photo over. This one of a man strung up in a similar web of wires in the same alley. From what officers at the scene could tell, the woman died first. The man sometime after. Likely after noticing the woman in distress and naively trying to help. Getting him caught in the trap himself. The next person smartly ran first. And called the police after. I see. But what does this? Brick flicked another photo. This one of a mostly eaten human corpse on a rooftop. An unfortunate victim of the Banshee Magenta killed earlier this week. He flicked another picture, several corpses in a dumpster. These were found in a dumpster. A day after the Banshee attack. Officers thought the bird did it because of the state of the corpses. But autopsy revealed that they were missing key organs. Notably livers. Bone marrow. Fatty tissue. And sections of the brain. The injuries were strange. And the coroner couldn't match them to any known monster types. So it's officially a murder for now. With suspicion of cannibalism. Another photo, a man with a distinctive neck wound. His corpse a shriveled husk. This one is obviously a vamp. So I've already sent in a request for an extermination crew. I'm also making this one a priority. Said Brick. Directing his comment towards Magenta and Turbo. I'd like to go one summer without an infestation. I believe I see your poi. Here's an interesting art project. Said Brick. Ignoring the somewhat green-looking PR official. Yet another picture skimmed over the table. This was perhaps the worst one so far. As this corpse was actually several different animal parts had been stitched together to create a chimeric nightmare. One which could only have been more terrifying if it had been alive. Among the various pieces, several could be identified as human. The PR official covered his mouth and turned away from the table, breathing slowing as he tried to keep his stomach under control. Turbo snickered half-heartedly at his distress. But everyone around the table was looking pale. Minus Brick and Jerry, who had already gone over the reports. "I understand your concerns, we haven't exactly made your job easy," continued Brick. "But frankly, yes. We do have higher priorities. This assortment of homicides share only two common factors: they were all inside E13. And they were all within the last week. You haven't been with us through an odd summer yet. I don't know how it goes back in the inner sectors. But out here this kind of body count is par for the course. And it will only get worse as we get deeper into odd summer. You'll have to forgive me if I don't give two figs about an undoubtedly insured bank. Clear." The PR official recovered himself somewhat, helped by the fact Jerry gathered up the photos and put them away. But nodded towards Brick in acknowledgement. And held any further comments. "Now, does anyone have any ideas for how to start approaching these murders? I'd like to get ahead of the curve while things are still relatively quiet." Suggestions were made. One of the best coming from Jerry. One of the two minions to be arrested had been Buzzer, whose power would be incredibly useful in finding the vampires. The minions' lawyers were all too willing to make a deal if it included Buzzer and Pebble's freedom. Brick loathed the idea of just letting them walk. But a vamp nest really did need to be destroyed as soon as possible, before it grew too big and split into new offshoots. They were about to move on to the next case when Jerry's phone vibrated. He checked it and muttered a quiet curse. "What's up, Jerry?" Trebla posted another video to his blog. "How does he even?" "Screw it. Just play it." Jerry set the video up on the flat screen. Just like with the first video. An opening title scene announced the contents in an annoyingly loud font. Super Sidekicks vs. Mega Minions. The case handlers for the sidekicks immediately groaned, while the PR official swore. Turbo zoomed out of the room and returned with snacks, earning him dirty looks from the central agents. He shrugged. It was fun as long as it wasn't happening to him. Trebla must have hacked or brought his own new scam drones in order to get some of this footage, as most of it was from outside the building at a distance. Nevertheless, the video quality and editing were top-notch. Just like the first had been. It started with one of the Hellion minions sneaking into the room. And Brick felt a chill when he realized the sidekicks had gotten distracted by the fight outside, and neglected to guard the door after beating Pebbles and Buzzer. Damned rookie mistake. The fight wasn't over till you left the field. And sometimes not even then. Maybe he'd have to get more involved in their training after all. Turbo mind the slurs, said Jerry automatically. Turbo rolled his eyes, but didn't argue. Brick focused back on the video, where the minion in question was getting spotted by the branch manager's lucky, or unlucky, timing. Admittedly, the minion sneaking had looked somewhat insectal. But it quickly became apparent the minion was a shapeshifter and not a mutant. Likely the same one that slipped away from Magenta. They weren't exactly common. Things quickly devolved into a typical super brawl. And Brick started noting down things to address with the sidekicks later. The group watched in relative silence, broken up only by quiet gasps as a sidekick took a hit, or Turbo crunching on his annoying snack food. Then Poena got caught. And Brick worried that the real injuries had begun after the fight. Some cowl types tended to get vindictive after they won. But Poena surprised him with her attempt to take out the pyro. Unfortunately, it went badly. And there were sharp intakes of breath as Morph barely avoided the following blast and went flying through the window. Magenta muttered a curse at that part. She was one of the heroes at the scene who might have saved Morph. But apparently she hadn't seen it happen. The next surprise was when it was the minion who caught and saved Morph. There were some confused mutters around the table. But that was quickly forgotten when Poena stabbed the shapeshifter. The PR official covered his eyes and started cussing a storm under his breath. Yeah, Brick didn't envy his job right now. It had been the right move on Poena's part, better to put down the threat first and sort out what was going on later. But admittedly it did not look good after that rescue. And damn it. She had been warned about using that spear. It was basically a guaranteed heart attack if. On screen. The shapeshifter grabbed Poena and methodically choked her out while slamming her against the floor, the spear that should have rendered him unconscious at a minimum sticking out of his chest the entire time. The room was silent as the video completed. The minion went into the office for a bit. Grabbed the branch manager. And on his way out kicked Poena into the table as she was recovering from unconsciousness, likely the cause of the broken ribs. Then the video even had scrolling end credits. Brick wasn't sure why. All of the normal roles like editing or special effects were just listed under the name Lia. Except for the actors who were listed as Poena, Morph, Ifrit, and... well. That's a problem, said Brick, breaking the silence. Quite the understatement, said the PR official. Obviously Poena and Morph weren't ready for deployment. Not them. I thought they did rather well actually. Did we watch the same video? What exactly did they do well? Well, they did the most important thing right, they didn't run away. Don't get me wrong. They'll need polish. But I'm a lot more interested in keeping them on. Seems you were right about them, Jerry. Told you so. Heh. Don't celebrate just yet. This still highlights what I was talking about, we're outnumbered. And Hellion is always hiring. Any chance of an ID on the shifter? Asked Brick. Actually yes. Costume looks familiar. It should be around. Aha. Jerry pulled out a picture of the minion, or at least one wearing a similar costume, sitting in an interrogation room. He got picked up with a bunch of other perps a couple of days ago. They couldn't get anything to stick. But they ID'd them all. Apparently he goes by Tofu. Around 18 years old. And he likes rectangular objects. Interrogator noted he mentioned that a lot. So basically we got nothing, said Turbo. Info is complete. Rats hit. No way, that is a rookie. Turbo's fingers blurred over the controls and the image of Tofu choking Poena showed on the screen. Maybe his power just makes him immune, supplied Peena's handler. Maybe. But he kept way too cool considering there were explosions going off in his face. Plus he was giving Ferosa the rope-a-dope earlier. And he gave Magenta the slip. Mark my words. He's a pro playing possum. Brick mulled that over. Turbo might have been exaggerating a bit, probably just mad about his leg. But whoever the shifter was, he was competent. Just their luck. They got two good powers with Morph and Poena. But Hellion matched them immediately with Ifrit and Tofu. Brick reached over to the controls and skipped the video over to the credits before letting them play. What's up, Brick? Asked Magenta. His name is missing from the credits. Seems a bit odd. Think it means something. Might be. Trebla doesn't seem like the type to miss a detail. Which means it was on purpose. Probably just doesn't want his name associated with such buffoonery. Muttered the PR official. Brick arched an eyebrow at that. That might just be it. Jerry. Think you can find me someone with a specific power set, something a bit more subtle? What did you have in mind? Someone who can start digging up dirt on guys like our shifter friend here. Right now we can't match their manpower. And Hellion's lawyers throw every trick in the book at us when we try to take players off the board. Time to stop trying to win an arms race, let's see how they like it when we play dirty. The meeting continued for a little longer. The handlers eventually leaving to check up on the sidekicks. And the PR official and Jerry left soon after to do damage control and get the ball rolling on Brick's idea respectively. Magenta and Turbo stayed to go over the video together with Brick again, hashing out plans for engagement as a team was critical. The video reached the part where the shifter was stabbed for the 5th time. There was a chance his power made him immune. But still. Turbo. Magenta. How long did you last when they were testing Poena's power? Asked Brick. Dark green. Answered Turbo. Yellow. Said Magenta sheepishly. It made sense. Her force field meant she didn't have much experience with injury. How far did you make it, bossman? Asked Turbo. Blue. I made it back to my apartment a few hours later. Adder had kept me for a long time to show me multiple methods of non-lethal takedown. I wasn't sure how a sleeper hold would have helped against someone who could shapeshift. But then again, Morph hadn't shifted his head or torso. Maybe it would have worked. I walked over to the window and sat down, placing the potted plant down next to me along with some of Spike's discarded spines. This had been a more troublesome job than I anticipated. But at least I had gotten a lot out of it. First was of course the MREs. I'd need to do some testing on how to apply their caloric packing to organic tissue. It would be useful if I could reduce my weight but maintain the same energy storage levels. Second was the discarded spines from Spike's. The composition of the spines was nothing special. But the design was nice. They were actually hollow on the inside. In a way that suggested it was to help keep the spines pointed in the right direction during flight. Kind of like fletching on an arrow. Except in this case it served the dual purpose of causing anything it impaled to bleed out faster if it hit a good spot. The launching mechanism was harder to understand with only the projectile. But I suspected it used a tendon snap, winding it too far on purpose. And then letting it snap to provide the launching force. Not as powerful as my slingshot design. But the aforementioned bleed-out mechanic was probably the target goal of the weapon. I recorded it for later. I might find a use for it. The last prize was the potted plant. I had already started researching plants on my phone. And I had asked other minions if there was anything I should know about it. Apparently all it needed was water and sunlight for day-to-day maintenance. And an expensive permit from the city that was normally not available to the average civilian. I asked if the permit requirement was because there was some kind of danger from owning a plant. And was glad to be assured that it was just because plants could provide a foothold for animals to survive from. When any animal was a potential disaster, it was understandably important to regulate organic activity in the city. Of course. They then told me that Sandra's legal department could forge a permit for me if I wanted to keep the plant and not pay fees. It seems illegal trafficking of organic organisms was a decent percentage of organized crime. A bit counterproductive to the city's defensive integrity. But I suppose different factions had different ideas on what was acceptable risk. The other minions had assured me it couldn't trigger, a few had even laughed when I asked. So I, very carefully, tore a leaf and stem off of the plant before eating it. It was somewhat what I expected after eating the strawberry leaf. Although I rolled my eyes at how many rectangular cells there were, probably why the bank deemed it worth having one. Some of this would be useful, the unusual cell walls had structural applications. And its method of gathering energy would certainly be useful. Not as good as eating. But in an emergency it might be useful. So far I hadn't needed to perform a core dump. But if it happened I might be able to use this photosynthesis to recover from it. I sat back and observed the plant. It really just sat there. That's all it did. Gather nutrients and grow. relying on the fact that it was not a threat and barely nutritious to keep it safe. It was so different from the other organisms in the city that all struggled for survival. Even the dirt it sat in was soft and brown, filled with nutrients. So unlike the rest of the city, which was all cement and metal. The closest I'd found to dirt like that was the sewers, where rat nests or broken pipes sometimes allowed for the buildup of organic waste. It was an organism that survived and nothing else. I could probably survive that way. Sit in an out-of-the-way spot. Photosynthesize. Might be safer than what I was currently doing. My phone vibrated. I pulled it out to check the ID and was surprised to find it was Tim calling me. I answered it. "Hello Tim. Hey Tofu. You and Mikey done with work yet?" His phone's off so I can't reach him. "I'm done. But I don't know if he is." "Well, find him if you can, man. A new Veercade opened at the mall. We gotta try it out." "Oh. I'll let Mikey know." But I was actually going to call it a day. I had to get started on my priority algorithms. And I actually sort of wanted to hibernate as well. Even after deleting the pain memory, I'd noticed that my thinking was a bit sluggish. This job had been stressful. Come on. Live a little. I dunno. I kinda have stuff to do. Please, I have an idea for triggers I really want to try. I'll buy you a Cinnabon. A Cinnabon. Yeah man. Or whatever else they have at the food court. Food what? I'm on my way. New Dawn Inc. Hey Brett, they want you up in meeting room 2. Brett looked up from his computer screen with bleary eyes. What for? Dunno. But I'd get up there soon. Boss said it was priority. It's always priority. Hey. That's just what they told me, man. Brett grumbled. And turned to his computer to start locking down his workstation. He hated being called away from his work. Not because it was interesting, but because he had to lock down his station every time he so much as went to take a piss. His cubicle was in an open room with dozens of other employees. And despite everyone having had around 5 background checks, security protocols had to be followed. If he didn't, his supervisor would give him an unbearably long talking to about the importance of maintaining a friendly and safe workplace environment. He finished locking up and headed for the elevator. At least he was able to deflect the chattier coworkers by saying he had a priority meeting. Damn, he hated being in a general office area. Everyone wanted to chat. Or gossip. Or talk about the weekly report. For the billionth time he cursed Odd Summer for ruining his project. He missed talking to actual scientists. Experts in their fields who wanted to actually work on their projects. When Dr. Mason had offered him a spot on his project 2 years ago. It had seemed like a dream come true. And it had been for a while. A cure for mutavis. It would change the world for the better if they could crack it. And between Dr. Mason's knowledge of microbiology and Brett's tinker power, it had seemed in reach. True. The project goal had changed to making an autonomous weapon for New Dawn Inc. Once they began footing the bill. But that was a minor hindrance. The weapons company ran a lot of wildlife suppression work out in the wilds past Fortress City's walls. And on one of the forays had recovered a very unique mutant animal sample. Of course, New Dawn's first idea had been to make a weapon out of it, dull-witted troglodytes. But trying to weaponize the sample had admittedly advanced Brett's nanite research by leaps and bounds. There had been drawbacks. Namely that the nanites were seen as foreign objects by Benedictsi. And the two did not play well together. But he had been getting closer and closer towards solving that problem. The prototype had proven unexpectedly helpful in that regard. Being able to see how his code affected the nanites' control over cells in real time had been a godsend. And he had started to resent working on the weapon less and less. And see it more as a tool. In the end he had made something that was a true engineering marvel. And not just some gadget or gizmo that would eventually break down the moment its maker moved on or died. He had become quite proud of his work on the prototype. For all it had started a weapon. Until it escaped. It kept Brett up some nights. He had looked over the data dumps hundreds of times since the accident. But hadn't found any explanation for its anomalous behavior. Just the slight uptick of its focus on combat for 2 weeks or so and then bam. The stupid cougar triggered. And ruined everything somehow. It was the only explanation he could think of. The elevator dinged as the doors opened. And he got on. On the way up his thoughts were pulled back to the prototype over and over. He had designed the code to allow the prototype to operate autonomously indefinitely. But that was all it had. There was no off button. No deadman switch. No reason to think it would ever just stop without a command to do so. And now it was out there. The only consolation Brett had was that the nanite self-destruct failsafe couldn't be circumvented. No matter how damaged the core unit became. He still remembered pulling the damaged command receiver from the remains. He trudged out of the elevator and down the hall. To the meeting room where a no doubt boring lecture or meeting was waiting for him. Maybe this was his divine punishment. Sentenced to office trivialities for the sin of not implementing planned obsolescence into a prototype. He stopped before the conference room door and took a deep breath. Gathering himself. Maybe it wouldn't be that bad, maybe they would want to discuss the finer points of molecular Kevlar sheathing, not the report he should have had filled out last Thursday. No. Probably not. They'd probably want a report on his report situation. He opened the door. Dar. Mason. Hello Brett. To Brett's complete surprise, Dar. Mason was seated at the conference table in front of him. As well as Mr. Savvy. Please. Please come in. Have a seat. We have a lot to discuss. Said Mr. Slick. The man was exactly as Brett remembered him. Pressed suit. Gelled hair. His laptop open next to him. He might as well have stepped through time. Brett moved to the table in a daze. What was going on? Was the project approved to continue when odd summer ended? Was it completely cancelled? He took a seat next to Dr. Mason. Who smiled and nodded at him. He dared to hope. Let me start right off with the good news. We found your prototype. Announced Mr. Slick. Brett's mouth fell open. Why you did? Oh my God. Did you recover it? Where has it been? Was anyone hurt? Oh God. It must have, right? What happened? Calm yourself, Mr. Savvy. I'm not exaggerating when I say I have good news. We haven't recovered it yet. But the situation is not at all what we expected. Or even could have predicted. Here. I've shown Dr. Mason already. But I believe this video can detail what is going on better than words ever could. Mr. Slick adjusted the laptop so Brett could see it better. And then pressed play. Brett wasn't sure what he had expected. Maybe a frightened news reporter detailing a monster attack. Or grainy security camera footage of the prototype killing some poor gas station employee. But this no. As the footage played, he went from confusion to doubting suspicion to complete bewilderment. Never in his wildest dreams could he have expected this. The video ended. And Brett looked back and forth between Dr. Mason and Mr. Slick. Expecting them to tell him it was an elaborate hoax at his expense. But the confetti and camera crew never appeared. That was the prototype. Indeed it was Mr. Savvy. Seems New Dawn Inc. Owes you and Dr. Mason an apology. Obviously the prototype was farther along than we thought. But it wasn't. I knew its code inside and out. There's no way it could have progressed this far on its own. He turned to Dr. Mason. Is there? I was hoping you would have the answer to that, said Dr. Mason. This isn't exactly my area of expertise. I don't believe this is anyone's area of expertise, said Mr. Slick. Which is why New Dawn Inc. is restarting the project. Effective immediately. On behalf of New Dawn Inc. I'm offering you both. Calm yourself, Mr. Savvy, said Mr. Slick. His tone was ice. Brett's mouth clicked shut. He suddenly remembered who he was talking to. Brett makes a good point, Mr. Slick, said Dr. Mason. We don't know exactly what happened. And there could be dangers we aren't seeing. We already have an example of the worst-case scenario. Dr. Mason, the superweapon escaped. It was released into the general populace. And the worst thing that happened was that it got itself a job. I'll admit its choice of vocation isn't ideal. But it's hardly the murdering monster Mr. Savvy seems to be imagining. The heroes will arrest it just like they do hundreds of other criminals every day. We'll collect it after the fact. And then the problem is solved. But the risk, said Brett. Less confidently. Gentlemen. I understand. You started this project with the intention to cure Mutavis and better the world. New Dawn Inc. agrees that is a worthwhile goal. And if it means securing your cooperation, it is willing to finance your research towards a Mutavis cure indefinitely. Both Brett's and Mason's eyes widened at that. But I believe you are missing the bigger picture. The fact of the matter is you have already achieved the design goal we originally set for you. You've created an autonomous weapon. One that can operate unguided. Repair itself. Grow itself. And adapt to any situation. It can differentiate friend from foe. Apply non-lethal force to a target. And it can contend with supers. Can you imagine if we had these helping every hero team in the city, sweeping the underground tunnels of monsters? Performing search and rescues. Helping heroes secure dangerous triggers and villains, no more putting the lives of officers in danger. No more waiting for the right power to fall into the hands of the right person. You want to better the world. This is the type of discovery that can do that. It can push back the horrors of Odd Summer. And it all hinges on one simple question. He stared at the man's face. The one eye that was still there opened. But didn't focus on anything in particular. No one was home. Maxwell leaned in. I'm sorry. The Guardian exited the now still bus. And flew upwards to avoid answering questions or talking to others. But then his comm beeped an alarm. And his hand went up automatically to answer. Guardian. W7 has just declared a lockdown. A high-speed skimmer will rendezvous with you in 35 seconds. Acknowledged. He replied. He waited. Steph got in at 2 a.m. Dead tired. She didn't bother to redress after the elevator stripped her costume off. Her plan was to just fall into bed and cuddle the beefcake until Dreamland took her. But instead she grabbed a robe when she realized the lights were on and sounds were coming from the living room. Was someone over? It wouldn't be the first time a few teammates stayed late to unwind after the day's events. But when she got to the living room, it was just Maxwell sitting on the couch and watching the news. In costume. Hey there, stud. What are you still doing up? Maxwell startled a bit. But greeted her with a smile before muting the television. Oh. I was just waiting up. Wanted to ask you if you managed to find out what was up with our army veteran friend. You waited until 2 a.m. just for that. 2 a.m. Guess I must have lost track of time. Steph bit her lip. Truth was, she had found out what was up with the veteran. But she had hoped Max would forget about it. No such luck. Max could be like a bulldog when it came to this kind of thing. She took a deep breath before deciding to rip off the band-aid. Well, the old man didn't talk. But I managed to get his name and look him up. His son ran a small company out of an office on one of the floors that Piffle destroyed. He lost everything when it was destroyed. Ah. So I suppose he. Last week. The funeral was yesterday. Neither said anything more. But Steph could see Max physically deflate. The Piffle incident had been one of the stories Max loved to bring up. Because no one had died in it. She drifted over to him and pulled him off the couch. Helping him peel off his costume, and throwing the comm in a corner, before leading him off to bed. Come on, stud. Been a rough day, let's get ourselves some shut-eye. Yeah. Replied Maxwell. Suddenly. Against all expectations. He chuckled. Speaking of rough. I got to see a lady fishtail her brand new Plostra into a streetlight. She was late to work and triggered. Ghosted a whole row of traffic. 'Cause she was late to work. Yeah. They looked at each other. Before bursting into laughter. The kind where you could only breathe to laugh harder. By the time they were finished. They had fallen into bed. And were out like lights soon after.